If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, Preface, The Lucky One. Today is July 30th. With the indoor temperature averaging 30 degrees Celsius, Aoi had no choice but to let the poor electric fan, which had been running non-stop for 5 days and nights, continue its grueling work. It seemed the fan was starting to wear out. Aoi couldn't pinpoint exactly when, but at some point, it began making a whining noise, like it was protesting. He swore that when he bought it 5 days ago, there was absolutely no sign of this peculiar, complaining sound. Nagoya, 40 to 41.1 degrees C. Shizuoka, 40 to 41 degrees C. Yokohama, 39 to 40 degrees C. The female announcer on the TV calmly reported these shocking temperatures, her soft voice in stark contrast to the terrifying numbers. It made people feel as though the earth was slowly turning into mercury. Then, rumble. A deafening roar suddenly surged in through the window, drowning out every sound in the room, asserting itself as if it owned the space. Aoi didn't flinch. He remained seated on the sofa, staring blankly at a slip of paper and a bank card on the coffee table before him. It was just the sound of another airplane taking off. He was used to it by now, as he heard it once or twice a day. While it used to bother him, he'd long since grown accustomed to the noise. After all, his apartment was right next to Tokyo's only major airport. This brings us to how Aoi ended up living in this place, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment of about 70 square meters. It wasn't a rental, he actually owned it. Yes, his name was on the deed. But he didn't buy it himself. In fact, he couldn't afford it. He was just an ordinary guy, fresh out of college, without the means to purchase a home. And no, his parents didn't buy it for him either. Aoi had grown up in an orphanage with other kids. Life was fine. Except for the dorm-style living arrangements, it wasn't much different from the way normal children lived. He had enough to eat, enough to wear, and received a proper education, which left him with a pretty favorable view of the country. That said, he did have a particular passion: anime. For Aoi, and for many other kids in the orphanage, anime was more than entertainment, it was like a friend and a teacher all in one. It gave them, each with their own sad backgrounds, a way to connect with one another. Among all the shows, Naruto was the most beloved. It's easy to see why. Naruto, the main character, was also an orphan. But let's get back on track. The apartment Aoi now lived in wasn't something he bought, nor was it given to him by his parents. He had inherited it from an old man he met a year ago, shortly after graduating from college. The old man, who was over 80 years old, claimed to have no family, no wife, no children. So, before he passed, he decided to leave all his belongings to a fated person. The catch? Aoi had to be his surrogate son until he passed away. When Aoi asked why he'd been chosen, the old man simply looked at him with a complicated expression and said, "You're easy on the eyes." At first, Aoi didn't believe it. He was a rational adult, and his first instinct was that this was some kind of scam. But when his name legally appeared on the property deed, and nearly 60,000 yen was deposited into his bank account, he couldn't deny it any longer. For the next 5 months, Aoi became the old man's son, staying by his side until he took his last breath. Sure, Aoi could have taken the money and the house and left without a second thought. But he didn't. He couldn't bring himself to do something that heartless. So, for 5 months, instead of looking for a job, he stayed home and listened to the old man recount stories from his military days. Aoi didn't even know how to cook, but he bought recipe books and learned to make meals. When the old man wanted fruit, Aoi would get up early to buy the freshest produce from the morning market. Sometimes, when the boredom was too much, he would sing, even though the only songs he knew were theme songs from anime. The old man didn't understand a word, but he always listened with a smile. In the final 2 months, the old man became bedridden and refused to go to the hospital, insisting it was a waste of money. So, Aoi made porridge every day and fed it to him, spoonful by spoonful. When some spilled, he'd carefully wipe it up. But the hardest part was dealing with the old man's declining physical state. He could no longer go to the bathroom on his own, and sometimes accidents happened. It was difficult for Aoi, and there were many times he thought about walking away. But every time he saw the old man's cloudy eyes, he swallowed his frustration and pushed through. To this day, he still isn't sure if he stuck around because of the apartment and money, or because he'd genuinely come to see the old man as a father figure. Now, why was Aoi sitting on the couch, staring at a slip of paper and a bank card. The reason might make you laugh, he'd been sitting there all night. The slip of paper was a check. A check with a 1, followed by 7 zeros. No, this wasn't part of the inheritance from the old man. He'd earned it. In fact, it had only taken him less than 48 hours. Sounds impressive, right? But it's really nothing special. Anyone could do it as long as they win the first prize in the lottery. Yep, the check in front of him was the prize from the national lottery. As for the bank card, well, that was even simpler. The 8-figure sum on the check was now safely deposited in his account. What the hell is going on with me? Why is this so ridiculous? You just buy a random lottery ticket and win. Okay, fine, I won. So what? It's just the first prize. The first prize, though? And I actually got it. All night long, these kinds of thoughts kept swirling through Aoi's mind in different variations. He simply couldn't wrap his head around how lucky he was. Wait a minute. The sound of the plane had long since faded, and Aoi's mind started to clear. He glanced around his living room and muttered to himself. Come to think of it, this apartment, it's kind of suspicious how I got it in the first place. Sure, he'd taken care of the old man for 5 months, but did that really balance out the value of a place like this? With luck like this, am I the protagonist of some kind of story? Is my golden finger just ridiculously good fortune? Maybe it was all the anime he'd watched, but Aoi's thoughts began to wander, and before he knew it, a strange idea slipped out of his mouth. What if I wanted to travel through time? To a world with superpowers or something? Chapter 1, Comic version of the Marvel World? Saitama Municipal General Hospital, Japan. Wah! A high-pitched baby cry suddenly filled the pristine delivery room. But just after the nurse finished cutting the umbilical cord, something unusual happened. Crack! A small burst of yellowish electricity flickered from the newborn's body, zapping the nurse's gloves. Within seconds, a large amount of golden electricity surged from the baby's body, lighting up the room in a flash of gold. The entire delivery room was suddenly awash in a bright electrical glow. Despite the shocking display, neither the doctor nor the nurses seemed fazed. They continued their tasks calmly, as if they'd expected something like this to happen. Oddly enough, the electric surge didn't harm anyone or disrupt the medical equipment in the room. It was as if the electricity was entirely under control. Is it a boy or a girl? The black-haired woman lying on the delivery bed, glancing up at the flickering light on the ceiling, asked in a tired voice. Congratulations, it's a very healthy boy. The experienced doctor, recognizing the unspoken question in her eyes, added with a warm, reassuring tone, but you can't touch him just yet, and you'll need to keep your distance. His quirk appears to be lightning-based and quite strong. Without insulated clothing, it could be dangerous. Lightning, hey, just as expected. All right then, she sighed, her disappointment clear, but she understood the situation. Her nerves, strained by the delivery, began to relax, and she quickly grew drowsy. Baby! I'll see you soon. She didn't fight the exhaustion. As the sound of her baby's cry echoed in her ears, she closed her eyes and drifted off into a deep sleep. She was utterly spent. Meanwhile, the nurses expertly placed the newly born Thunderbolt baby into an incubator designed to block electricity. The doctor, wiping his hands, stepped out of the delivery room to speak with the child's father. Inside the incubator, the baby's cries suddenly stopped. Not because he was soothed, but because Aoi, the consciousness inside the baby, had calmed down. I've time traveled. No, technically I've been reincarnated, as a baby that can discharge electricity. As Aoi processed this, excitement began to rise. I really ended up in a world with superpowers. And they're completely normal here. Earlier, he'd been terrified when the electricity burst out of him, but the casual reaction of the doctors and nurses to his powers told him everything. He didn't know how he'd generated the electricity, but the fact that no one was panicking meant it wasn't out of the ordinary. This was good news. It meant he wouldn't be hunted down or feared as some kind of freak. That was a huge relief, especially since he had no way to protect himself right now. What kind of world is this? As he was wheeled into a room full of other newborns by a gentle nurse, Aoi's mind raced with possibilities. But instead of crying again, he stayed silent, his attention drawn to the strange babies around him. Some of them didn't even look human. There were babies with long horns, tails, and red skin, which were strange but still somewhat human-like. But what was going on with that black and white panda-looking baby? Or the one that looked like a giant ant? Could this be a fantasy world with multiple races? Aoi wondered, his curiosity piqued. But then he reconsidered, looking at the advanced technology around him, the high-tech incubators, the medical equipment, and the cameras mounted on the ceiling. No, this place has to be a sci-fi world. The tech is too advanced for just magic. It's probably a world where superpowers and advanced technology coexist. With the limited information he had, that was the best conclusion Aoi could come to. But one thing was certain, he was excited about the life ahead of him. Here's hoping my luck from the last life carries over. Time flew by, and before long, Aoi had turned 3 years old. However, his new name was no longer Aoi. Now, he was Kaminari Denki. He didn't mind the new name at all. His old name had little meaning to him, and the fact that he now had real parents was something he was immensely grateful for. Over the past 3 years, he had experienced their unwavering love and care. To him, his new name imbued with his parents' hopes and affection was something precious, something to be cherished. Of course, he hadn't spent the past 3 years just basking in familial love. Despite his young age, Aoi, now Kaminari Denki, had been busy gathering information. Since he couldn't do much physically, he'd focused on what he could do, watching, listening, and absorbing everything around him. The TV had become his best source of information. While there was a computer at home, it would have been far too suspicious for a toddler to start typing and searching for information. Even in a world where superpowers were common, being a 3-year-old computer whiz was asking for trouble. He was cautious enough to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. So, what had he learned? First and foremost, superpowers, or quirks as they were called here, were everywhere. From the moment he was born, he realized that his lightning ability wasn't something unusual in this world. As he grew, he confirmed that he was now living in Japan, his parents were Japanese, and they seemed to live an ordinary life in a parallel version of Earth. While it was a bit unsettling that this wasn't his original world, it was reassuring to know that countries like the United States, China, and Russia still existed. The geography of this world was nearly identical to the one he knew. That was comforting, in a way. He wasn't entirely lost in some unrecognizable place. Even more important was what he'd learned from TV. This world had heroes. And not just a few. Heroes were everywhere, and they were celebrated. This revelation made Kaminari's mind spin with wild possibilities. He had a theory, one that was crazy, but not impossible. This might actually be the Marvel Universe, but with more than just superheroes. Mutants, Inhumans, all sorts of superpowered races, it's all here. Chapter 2, Hero, ES, and the Guitar. No, this isn't the Marvel world. A 6-year-old blonde boy sat on his mother's lap, staring blankly at the computer screen in front of him. There was a sense of relief, but also a tinge of regret. Up until today, he had been convinced that the world he'd been reincarnated into was a comic book version of the Marvel Universe, where Earth was constantly being ravaged by all sorts of chaos. Although the TV didn't feature any familiar superheroes or supervillains, people here referred to superpowers as quirks. That had confused him for a while. But he dismissed it, thinking it made sense after all, he was in Japan, not the United States. It wasn't odd that he couldn't spot Spider-Man or Iron Man swinging by on the news. But all of that was shattered today. Today was his first day at Saitama Municipal Elementary School. Since it was the first day, there wasn't much actual teaching. Most of the day was spent getting to know the campus, meeting the homeroom teacher, and receiving a few textbooks. However, their teacher, Rimi Yonkara, gave a brief introduction on the basics of quirks, especially how they originated. Listening to her explanation, Kaminari realized that this world was nothing like the Marvel Universe he'd imagined. His entire understanding had been mistaken. As soon as he got home, he begged his mother to let him use the computer to look up more information on quirks and the world around him. His excuse? He was eager to learn more about the world. His mother, clearly thrilled by his curiosity, complied without hesitation. It's so wonderful to see you so eager to learn on your very first day of school. And so, he finally learned the truth. This wasn't Marvel at all. No mutants, no Iron Man, no Captain America. Even more surprising, the concept of hero, ES, in this world was vastly different from what he had expected. Here, hero, ES, were essentially government employees. They got paid for their heroic work, receiving significant rewards from the government for their actions. To be honest, Kaminari found it hard to agree with that idea. In his mind, those people were more like glorified special police officers, not heroes. Perhaps it was his previous life's upbringing that influenced his thinking. To him, the word hero wasn't something just anyone could use. A hero, in his mind, was someone who made great sacrifices for their country or the people without expecting anything in return. That's what he believed a true hero should be. These special police were just good citizens and good public servants at best, in his opinion. Of course, Kaminari didn't have any extreme thoughts like wanting to change the system or revolt against it. He'd been given a second chance at life, and he wasn't about to waste it by doing something foolish. Instead of fighting against the rules, it was better to adapt. That was the key to living a comfortable life. So, while he was relieved that this wasn't the chaotic Marvel universe, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed that he wouldn't see those familiar heroes he'd grown up with. As Kaminari thought more about the world's background, his mind wandered to an anime he'd watched in his previous life, One Punch Man. That world also had professionalized hero, just like this one. However, after asking his mother to look up the hero rankings, he quickly confirmed that this wasn't One Punch Man's world either. Even though they lived in Saitama City, he was certain because the heroes from One Punch Man didn't exist in the rankings here. For example, the number 1 hero, All Might, didn't exist in that anime at all. Well, with this newfound information, Kaminari finally had a more accurate understanding of the world. Since it wasn't any world he was familiar with, he would have to carefully consider his plans for the future. In this new life, he didn't want to be as ordinary as he had been in his previous one. He remembered a saying from his old world: even if a loser gets a second chance through reincarnation, they're still likely to remain a loser because laziness doesn't change just by traveling through time. Honestly, Kaminari Denki mostly agreed with that statement. But he also believed that nothing was absolute. If out of 100 reincarnated people, 90 remained the same, the remaining 10 might change for the better. Because those 10 wanted to change their fate. Because they didn't want to be the same person they were before. Kaminari believed he was one of those 10 people. He was ready to work hard and transform his life. As for his future plans, it was clear that his quirk was going to be the center of it all. How to train his quirk and make it stronger would definitely be a lifelong pursuit. He'd asked his mother about it, and she explained that his quirk had been officially classified as a discharge ability, meaning he could generate and release electricity. However, it wasn't an infinite power source. He had to charge his body first, storing the energy inside before releasing it. Upon learning this, the first thing he thought about was the most basic yet important question: how could he increase the amount of electricity he could store? But when he asked his mother, she admitted she didn't know. She explained that professional questions about quirks were best left to licensed hero, She herself had only studied general subjects in high school and hadn't taken any hero courses, so she didn't have that kind of knowledge. But Mom, don't you practice your quirk? Kaminari asked, tilting his head cutely. It wasn't like he was trying to act cute, it's just that as a 6-year-old boy with big, bright eyes and a charming smile, everything he did naturally came across as adorable. In this life, his appearance really was quite disarming. He could only compare it to a human version of a Pikachu. We don't need to practice our quirks. His mother, with her long, straight black hair, looked at him lovingly and explained, the law says that only licensed hero, can use their quirks under certain conditions. For ordinary people like us, it's illegal to use them. Oh. Kaminari nodded, thinking it over. He understood the reasoning behind the rule, it was just about maintaining order and stability. Then how do you get that license? He asked. His mother laughed gently and kissed his forehead. That's something your teachers will explain when you're older. For now, it's far too soon for you to worry about that. Her soft smile widened as she added, what's important for you now is to study hard and take care of your body. Even if I don't know much about quirks, I know that quirks are part of your physical self. Having a strong body will definitely help. Kaminari nodded again. He had to agree with her. He needed to start taking better care of his body. First thing tomorrow, he would start waking up early and go for runs. All right, it's getting late. You have school tomorrow, so it's time for bed. His mother stood up and switched off the computer, then gently placed him in his bed, a bright yellow crib adorned with lightning bolt patterns. Mom. Just as she was about to turn off the lights and leave, Kaminari called out softly. Yes, sweetie. Can I learn to play the guitar? I really want to learn how to play. Chapter 3, Midnight. February, while not quite as lively as March, still brings a hint of renewal. The lawns on both sides of the park are already covered in a fresh, green carpet, though without the layers of delicate flowers, the space feels a bit monotonous. Ha! A young man with blonde hair, streaked with a bolt of black lightning, came to a stop, his chest heaving from the exertion of his run. He approached an ancient tree with a thick, moss-covered trunk, his face shining with sweat. With a deep breath, he inhaled the cool, fragrant air filled with the scent of the park's greenery. Phew! Exhaling a cloud of breath, Kaminari felt his entire body hum with energy. This feeling of taking in fresh air after a run, he never got tired of it. It made every part of him feel alive. No matter how many times I experience this, it never gets old, he murmured, his gaze rising to the ancient cherry blossom trees lining the path. A handsome smile crossed his face, though there was a note of regret in his tone. Looks like the cherry blossoms won't bloom before school starts. This was Omiya Park in Saitama Prefecture, not far from the city where he lived. It was a short subway ride away, and for years, Kaminari had come here to exercise regularly. The thing he loved most about this park were the cherry blossom trees. There were over 1,000 of them, each an old tree with its own history. When March rolled around, the whole park would be bathed in pink, the cherry blossoms filling the air with their subtle fragrance. He remembered the first time he'd come to enjoy the cherry blossoms with his parents. It had left him stunned. On that day, hundreds of families gathered under the blossoms, sharing carefully prepared lunches and drinks. People sang traditional songs, sometimes with friends, sometimes with strangers, and vendors sold treats from stalls they'd set up around the park. It was a lively, vibrant scene. But most days, like today, the park was quiet. Aside from a few elderly folks taking their dogs for a walk, it was rare to see anyone else, especially a 15-year-old like Kaminari. Well, it's almost 6, he muttered, glancing at his watch. He was wearing a black and yellow tracksuit, and a pair of headphones hung around his neck. It was time to head to the subway station. His schedule had been the same for years now: get up at 4:30 a.m., head to the park for a run, and then find a secluded spot to practice and study his quirk. Omiya Park was large, and at this early hour, he could train without anyone noticing. Well, almost no one. There had been one instance where an elderly man walking his Shiba Inu had spotted him experimenting with his quirk. But the man hadn't said a word, only smiled kindly before continuing along the path. Kaminari wasn't too worried. As long as he didn't hurt anyone or himself, nobody was likely to make a fuss. But when he told his mother about his morning runs, he left out the part about practicing his quirk. He didn't want to worry her, so in her mind, he was just a good son who studied hard, exercised regularly, and had a love for music. By now, Kaminari was nearing the park's entrance, less than 200 meters from the subway station. He was about to put on his headphones and enjoy some music on his way home, but he was stopped by the sight of a small crowd gathered ahead, along with the sound of worried voices. Did someone call an ambulance? It's on its way. But it'll take at least 10 minutes to get here. What do we do? He's not breathing. Curious, Kaminari approached and saw an elderly man lying unconscious on the ground, surrounded by several anxious onlookers. A little Shiba Inu stood beside the old man, licking his face in confusion. Wait, isn't that the old man? Kaminari immediately recognized him. It was the same man who had spotted him practicing his quirk not too long ago. He still remembered the kind smile the old man had given him. Excuse me, what happened to him? Kaminari asked, addressing a bald, heavy-set man nearby. But it was a worried woman with purple hair who answered him. We're not sure. He just collapsed out of nowhere. By the time we checked, he wasn't breathing, she said, wringing her hands. The bald man nodded, adding, I called for an ambulance, but they said it'll take at least 10 minutes. We're afraid the old man won't last that long. Kaminari frowned, understanding their concern. Without oxygen, even a few minutes could be fatal, but he didn't have any first aid training. For a moment, he wasn't sure what to do. We need a hero. Is there a hero around here? A younger man in the crowd shouted suddenly, and everyone's attention shifted. Heroes. Yet. There must be a pro-hero nearby. Someone find a hero. In a society filled with heroes, it was natural for people to think of them in emergencies. But no one here knew how to contact a hero directly, other than through their agency numbers. The issue was, they needed a hero now, not in 10 minutes. Don't worry. A hero is here. Just as the crowd's anxiety peaked, a sultry voice rang out. Before anyone could react, a figure darted past them, moving so quickly that Kaminari barely registered it. That speed, incredible, Kaminari thought, his heart racing. But before he could process the movement, he was hit by a wave of strong perfume, making his head swim slightly. It's midnight. The crowd began to cheer, and someone quickly explained, she's a pro-hero. A teacher at UA High School. Kaminari's eyes focused on the woman kneeling beside the old man. She was checking his vitals with a calm, practiced efficiency. A teacher from U.A. He's in cardiac arrest. Midnight's voice was firm and decisive. She wasn't a doctor, but as a senior pro-hero, she had plenty of experience in emergency situations. Without hesitation, she began administering chest compressions, trying to restore the old man's blood circulation. At the same time, she gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, not pausing for a second. It's not working. Chest compressions alone won't save him. Midnight's voice grew strained with frustration. Her quirk wasn't meant for healing, and she was running out of options. Cardiac arrest. A young voice broke through the tension, catching Midnight's attention. A slender shadow appeared beside her, cast by the morning light. I think I might be able to help, Miss Hero. Chapter 4, Rules and Trash. What are you doing? Before Midnight could fully process what was happening, Kaminari had already crouched down and stretched his hand toward the old man's chest. In the next second, her white, slender hand tightly grabbed his wrist. Kid, what do you think you're doing? Her brows furrowed in frustration, and her eyes flashed with disbelief. A child's interference during such a critical moment? It was outrageous. However, Kaminari didn't react angrily. Instead, he looked up at her, his eyes calm and full of sincerity. With a quiet but confident voice, he began to explain. You just said the old man's heart stopped because of cardiac arrest, and your chest compressions and CPR aren't working, right? That means he needs a stronger shock to revive him. So, stop talking. Just listen to me, Kaminari interrupted her, knowing they didn't have a second to waste. My quirk acts like a defibrillator. My hands can generate the right kind of electricity to restart his heart. As he spoke, he let a small spark of golden electricity dance between his fingers, proving his point before it quickly faded. Midnight hesitated for a second, feeling the faint static between them. The sensation made her instinctively pull back her hand, starting to believe him. But you don't have a hero license. According to the regulations, you're not allowed to. Before she could finish, Kaminari had already placed his hands on the old man's chest, focusing intently. Midnight could only stand by, her heart pounding as she watched the young boy defy the rules, hoping his gamble would pay off. Though she was deeply unsettled by Kaminari's actions, it wasn't just because he'd disobeyed her. What truly frustrated her was how reckless he was, stepping in where he had no legal right to act. Regulations were there for a reason, after all. Whether or not the old man survived, Kaminari would still face serious consequences. The law didn't care if the outcome was good or bad, breaking the rules was breaking the rules. But now that he'd begun, all Midnight could do was watch. She silently prayed he knew what he was doing, though she was already planning on teaching him a lesson afterward. He needed to understand the weight of responsibility, the importance of laws and rules. That's what it meant to be a hero. On the other hand, Kaminari was entirely focused on the task at hand. He carefully controlled the electricity coursing through his body, sending small, precise shocks directly to the old man's heart. This technique, which he called electrotherapy, was something he had developed himself, inspired by the thunder-based abilities of the character Enel from One Piece in his previous life. The concept was simple: use fine control over his electric current to act as a defibrillator, stimulating the heart back into rhythm. When Kaminari first started training his quirk, he'd never thought about learning such delicate techniques. Like any kid, he'd imagined powerful, flashy moves with big effects, stuff like 100,000 volts, Thunder Dragon's Roar, or God's Judgment. But reality had thrown cold water over his ambitions. While his quirk allowed him to generate electricity, Kaminari quickly realized he couldn't control large amounts of current at all. Once it left his body, it scattered wildly into the air, losing energy almost immediately. The idea of shaping or directing his electricity seemed impossible. He couldn't even guide the current in a straight line. Worse yet, the risk of accidentally injuring others was high. The uncontrolled nature of his power made it far too dangerous to use around people. This was the first of his two major limitations. Overcoming it would require intense training to master precise control. But the second flaw was even more debilitating and far harder to fix. Whenever Kaminari pushed his output beyond a certain threshold, his brain would short-circuit. He'd lose consciousness and, for a while, turn into nothing more than a grinning idiot, only able to give a thumbs up and giggle. Why did he know this so well? Well, let's just say he'd learned the hard way. In the end, Kaminari had to give up on the dream of massive electrical discharges. Instead, he turned his attention to honing his fine control over his quirk, drawing inspiration from anime techniques that focused on precision rather than raw power. 9 years of relentless training had paid off. Now, he could create complex three-dimensional shapes, like a small Pikachu, out of thin strands of electricity. This was proof of how far his microcontrol had advanced. It was also the reason he'd had the confidence to step in and perform defibrillation today. He wasn't acting out of arrogance, he was relying on years of hard work. The crowd surrounding them had fallen silent, holding their breath as Kaminari worked. It felt as though even the birds had stopped singing, waiting to see what would happen. And then, suddenly, the old man's chest rose. He's breathing. Oh my God, his heart is beating again. Thank goodness. The crowd erupted in cheers, their excitement palpable. Some of the older women even had tears in their eyes as they watched the miracle unfold. At the same time, the wail of a distant ambulance echoed through the park, but nobody cared about that anymore. Their attention was entirely on the blonde boy, who stood up slowly, looking both relieved and exhausted. Kid! Do you realize what you've done? As the others praised him, Midnight stepped forward, her voice cold and angry. You broke the law. You're a middle school student, aren't you? If this gets recorded in your file, you'll have a hard time getting into any high school, no matter how good your grades are. Do you understand how serious this is? Kaminari glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Does it really matter? He asked casually. Would you have preferred to let the old man die just because of some regulation? He stepped forward, his eyes meeting Midnight's, his tone calm but firm. Would you give up your future just to follow the rules, even if it meant losing someone's life? Midnight's anger faltered. She stared at him, the confidence in his expression catching her off guard. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Rules. Kaminari chuckled softly as he prepared to leave. He had his graduation ceremony today, and he didn't want to be late. But before he walked away, he turned back one last time. Yeah, people who break the rules are trash. But... He paused, his voice firm. People who don't value life are worse than trash. With that, he headed toward the subway station, leaving behind a stunned silence. Even Midnight, her mouth slightly open, was speechless. His words had struck deeper than she expected. Wait. Her voice rang out again, stopping him in his tracks. What's your name? Tell me your name. Kaminari paused, glancing back over his shoulder. Kaminari. Kaminari Denki from Tanibori No. 1 Junior High. If you want to call the police and arrest me, that's where you'll find me. And with that, he disappeared into the distance. Chapter 5, Kaminari. Kaminari Denki. The female hero muttered the name under her breath, curling her lips in a mock show of disdain. You little brat, if I really wanted to catch you, do you think I'd let you get away? Pfft. But for some reason, she suddenly giggled, her voice playful. But those childish words. I don't mind them at all. Then, in a louder voice, she turned to the gathered crowd of residents. Everyone, listen up. I've decided to temporarily act as that boy's guardian under my authority as a pro-hero. That means I, Midnight, am responsible for any consequences of his quirk used today. According to the law, minors or student heroes without a license could only use their quirks under the supervision of a guardian, be it a parent, teacher, police officer, or hero. Professional heroes, under special circumstances, could take on that role temporarily, but they also had to shoulder all the responsibility for whatever happened. That's why most pro-heroes avoided it. Minors were unpredictable, and things could easily spiral out of control. The crowd nodded in understanding. They were all adults and knew the complexities of the situation, so everyone quietly accepted Midnight's declaration with kind smiles. Meanwhile, Kaminari, completely unaware of what had transpired, had already returned home, showered, and was getting ready for school. He stood at the door in his white school uniform. Today was the graduation ceremony, so it would likely be the last time he'd wear this uniform that had accompanied him for the past 3 years. "Here, your guitar." His mother, still young and vibrant, handed him a bright yellow guitar case, smiling as she watched him step out of the house. She then slipped on her carefully chosen blue and white crystal heels. Yes, his mother was accompanying him to school today. She'd sit with the other parents in the audience and watch him perform on stage. There would be performances by other students too, of course, but in Kaminari's mind, his mother was coming specifically to see him, not anyone else. "I think this is the first time Mom will see me perform live." Kaminari glanced at her, smiling as they walked together. His mother tucked a stray lock of black hair behind her ear and nodded seriously. "So, son, make sure you don't embarrass yourself in front of everyone. Don't worry. Your son's going to be the most handsome one there today." Maybe it was because he'd lived a plain, ordinary life in his previous world, but now Kaminari had a deep desire to live boldly. In this life, he wanted to stand out, to shine like lightning across the sky. Tanibori Junior High School was just 2 stops away on the subway, practically next door. It took only 5 minutes to get there. When Kaminari and his mother arrived near the school, they saw groups of boys and girls in their uniforms, their youthful faces full of excitement as they walked alongside their parents. Needless to say, these were his fellow graduates. But when Kaminari, carrying his guitar case, appeared at the school gates, the atmosphere changed in an instant. "Ah! It's Kaminari. Look, it's really him. He's as cool as ever. Mom! Dad! Look, that's Kaminari. Isn't he handsome? Isn't he just the coolest? Oh, that's the kid who's been top of the class for 3 years straight. He really does look impressive. Hey! We're not talking about his grades." Kaminari's mother blinked in surprise, taking in the scene around her. She looked at her son with raised eyebrows. "Are you really this popular?" The way those kids were looking at him, it was like they were staring at a celebrity. It's not a big deal," Kaminari said with a shrug, though inside he felt a spark of excitement and pride. It wasn't every day he got to show off in front of his mom. With the crowd's eyes on them, mother and son made their way toward the school auditorium. Once inside, they had to part ways. Kaminari needed to head backstage to check his equipment and get ready to stand with his classmates. And, of course, because of the widespread existence of quirks, there were plenty of students in the school who didn't look entirely normal. Kaminari was already used to seeing people with unique appearances, horns, tails, or other unusual features, but it didn't faze him anymore. The ceremony started with the usual formalities, speeches from the principal, teachers, and various student representatives. The school song played softly in the background, and one by one, students were called to the stage to receive their diplomas. The only moment that really stood out? The thunderous applause that filled the auditorium when Kaminari's name was called and he walked across the stage. After the diplomas were handed out, the stage was cleared for the performances. This was the highlight of the day, and everyone had been looking forward to it. The students who had spent the past 2 months preparing their acts performed with a mix of nerves and excitement. Each act was met with enthusiastic applause, and the performers, their faces flushed with pride, hugged each other as they returned backstage. Kaminari watched from behind the scenes, clapping along with everyone else. He wasn't trying to act cool, he genuinely appreciated their efforts. His own performance was up next, so he opened his guitar case and slung his electric guitar over his shoulder. Though his act was the finale, he wanted to familiarize himself with the instrument and make sure everything was in place. The music teachers had already set up the speakers and effects for him, so all that was left was for him to play. The guitar itself was a striking piece, with sharp, angular edges shaped like a bolt of lightning. The body was black with gold thunder patterns, but what stood out the most was the cute little Pikachu sticker on the front. Of course, this world didn't have Pokemon. Kaminari had drawn Pikachu himself and turned it into a custom sticker. He felt an odd connection to the character, something about Pikachu's electric powers resonated with him. This guitar was a special gift from his father, given to him 5 years ago. It was expensive, worth about 2 months of his father's salary. Kaminari cherished it, and he had even given it a name, Pikachu. Lost in his thoughts, Kaminari was startled when one of the teachers tapped him on the shoulder. "Kaminari, you're up next." "Already?" He was surprised by how quickly the time had passed, but he smiled and thanked the teacher. With his guitar slung across his body, he stepped up to the ready position, feeling the weight of everyone's expectations on his shoulders. "Kaminari's going to play that song, right?" "Yeah. That song. There's a music video online and a single on MTV, but hearing it live is going to be amazing." "Ha! You probably know all the lyrics by heart, don't you? Come on, like you're any different. I bet you've got Pikachu pillows all over your room." Kaminari smiled to himself as he overheard the excited whispers from the audience. His classmates had been buzzing about his performance for weeks. As the host called his name, the energy in the room shifted. "And now, the final performance of the day, the one you've all been waiting for." As soon as he said that, the crowd erupted into thunderous cheers. The sound was so deafening that even those backstage could clearly hear what they were chanting. "Kaminari! Kaminari! Kaminari! All right, let's welcome the performance by the superstar of Tanibori No. 1 Junior High. Kaminari Denki! Only my railgun!" The final shout came from the entire audience in unison, their voices merging into one. Chapter 6, Discovery. The school's auditorium stage wasn't particularly large, yet the teachers had gone to great lengths to create the best atmosphere for Kaminari's performance. They replaced all the curtains with thick, black, light-blocking fabric. As the lights dimmed and the entire auditorium was engulfed in darkness, the teachers, students, and parents remained calm. After all, this kind of setup was quite common here, and everyone was familiar with the process. Snap! The moment the colorful spotlights above the ceiling converged on the center of the stage, Kaminari was already standing there, an electric guitar slung casually around his waist. He flashed a warm smile at the crowd as he gripped the microphone stand. Several music teachers, serving as backup musicians, held bass guitars or sat behind the drum set, their presence complementing Kaminari like stars surrounding the moon. But instead of bursting into cheers, the students waited in an expectant hush, as if collectively holding their breath for what was to come. Without saying a word, Kaminari strummed the pick across the guitar strings, launching into a rhythmic intro with practiced ease. The familiar melody swept through the auditorium like a wave, instantly igniting the crowd. Deafening cheers and screams erupted, their energy turning the entire venue into a boiling cauldron of excitement. "Let go! A dream carved in my heart. The future can be forsaken too." The moment he belted out the opening line, his powerful voice resonated alongside the fierce accompaniment. It felt like the air itself burst apart, the combined shouts of the students surging like waves, crashing against the walls and filling every corner. This was their idol, someone who walked the same halls, shared the same classes, and was, incredibly, one of their own. The sense of pride, connection, and the quality of the music left a lasting impression on everyone present. Kaminari wasn't just another talented student, he was a symbol of excellence in their midst. "I don't recognize boundaries. Meaningless. This power shines like light." After Kaminari finished the first half of the song with an almost feverish tempo, the crowd finally joined in as he reached the line, "If the path I've walked can only be retraced." Together, they sang along, a chorus of hundreds merging into one voice. "Might as well destroy everything here. A town that's fallen into the abyss of darkness. How long can people keep fighting?" Even Kaminari's mother, who was sitting among the audience, was astonished. The sheer scale of the students' response left all the parents in the guest section wide-eyed and open-mouthed. What on earth was happening? Was this really just a junior high school graduation ceremony? It felt more like a rock star's cross-country tour than an ordinary school event. Previously, they had heard their children rave about how cool Kaminari was, how well he could sing, and how popular he was at school. They hadn't taken it too seriously at the time. After all, parents usually cared more about his academic performance and his impressive feat of being the only student from Tanaben First Junior High to apply for UA High School's hero course and pass the written exam. But now, witnessing this firsthand, they realized just how exceptional this boy was. In Japanese society, test scores aren't the only measure of a student's worth, they aren't even the most important factor. What truly matters is the student's overall character and achievements. However, despite being so well known within the school, Kaminari wasn't a household name beyond its walls. 2 years ago, he had posted a music video online where he played and sang Only My Railgun on his electric guitar, gaining some attention for the quality of the performance and his good looks. But he was still just a small-time singer, with songs that were better known than his face. The performance ended before long, the song was only a little over 4 minutes. As the last note hung in the air, it signaled not only the end of the performance but also the closing of Kaminari's 3-year middle school journey. What lay ahead was the more demanding world of Hero High School, where a multitude of challenges related to becoming a hero awaited him. In this world, the hero circle is the pinnacle of achievement. Now that Kaminari had been given a second chance at life, there was no way he'd let it pass without aiming for the top. After the ceremony concluded, Kaminari and his mother left the campus together, accompanied by the well wishes of friends and classmates. Perhaps feeling a touch of nostalgia, Kaminari glanced back at the school's name Tanibori No. 1 Junior High one last time. Then he turned around and continued down the path to his future with his mother by his side. UA High School. I can't wait. But why did that female teacher come to mind? As soon as they arrived home, his overjoyed mother announced that the family would have a grand dinner to celebrate barbecue. Kaminari certainly had no complaints, in fact, he welcomed the idea. He was still growing, and some extra protein couldn't hurt. But with some time to spare before his father got off work, Kaminari changed out of his school uniform, carefully folding it before placing it in the closet. He then hung his guitar bag on the wall. Today was February 6th, and there were still 20 days until the practical exam at UA High School. He had already prepared as much as he could, so for the next few days, he would allow himself to rest and recharge, ensuring he was in peak condition when the time came. Changing into casual clothes, Kaminari flopped onto his soft bed. It's worth noting that his pillow and blanket were both adorned with Pikachu designs, and a Pikachu figure model sat on his computer desk. He hadn't bought these items himself. Considering he could draw Pikachu by heart, there wasn't much point in buying merchandise. It was all made at home. Before he knew it, his eyelids grew heavy, his breaths became deep and even, and he drifted into sleep. The excitement from earlier had taken its toll. The Pikachu clock on the wall quietly ticked away until nearly 5 in the afternoon, when the wooden door to his room suddenly creaked open. Hey, still sleeping? A middle-aged man with thick blonde hair entered. When he saw his son dozing, he reached out and flicked Kaminari's forehead with 2 fingers. Crackle! But as soon as his fingers touched Kaminari's hair, a bright spark of electricity shot out, causing the man to quickly pull his hand back. Oddly, silver-white sparks crackled from his fingertips but fizzled out before forming a complete current. Dad, seriously? Kaminari rubbed his forehead, looking at his father with a mixture of irritation and helplessness. I've told you countless times, it's dangerous. My self-defense currents are stronger than your low-level lightning immunity can handle. Kaminari's father also had an electrical quirk, which was why the doctors had anticipated Kaminari's abilities and taken extra precautions for lightning protection. But quirks have levels. His father's quirk was a lower-level static ability, capable only of releasing tiny amounts of static electricity that could cause a tingling sensation at best. He also possessed a passive trait common to lightning-based quirks, partial immunity to electricity. This is similar to those with fire or ice-based quirks, who are generally resistant to burns or frostbite. However, this resistance had its limits. With enough output, even they could get hurt. Haha, my bad, his father chuckled sheepishly, rubbing his slightly numb fingers. I didn't expect your currents to be that strong. His tone turned serious, but is it because your quirk level is naturally high, or have you been training in secret? Well. Chapter 7, Small Goals, Big Dreams. Ha ha ha. Seeing his handsome son looking slightly embarrassed after being teased, Kaminari's father couldn't help but feel a bit smug. So, you figured it out, hey? Realizing his father was just joking around, Kaminari relaxed, got out of bed, and asked curiously, when did you notice? His dad put on a mock-serious expression, son, never underestimate the wisdom of adults. Especially since you've chosen the path of becoming a professional hero. You'll definitely face dangerous people in the future, so you should never let your guard down. His father's tone was a mixture of concern and expectation. It was clear he was worried for Kaminari's future and didn't want to see the tragedy of a parent outliving their child. Okay, Dad, I promise I'll take your advice to heart. Even though Kaminari knew he was only aiming for UA High School to get the hero license, with no actual intention of pursuing a career as a professional hero, he understood his father's worries. There was no need to argue, so he just went along with it. With a grin, he stepped forward and hooked his arm around his father's, his tone playful. "I'm starving. I can't wait to eat some of that delicious barbecue." "You little glutton, fine, fine," his dad said, shaking his head and smiling. He could only hope his son had really taken his words seriously because they were extremely important. "Your mom and I are ready to go. We've just been waiting for you." With that, the family of three happily made their way down to the apartment's parking lot, not wasting any time. Without further ado, they piled into the car and headed to a well-known barbecue restaurant in downtown Saitama. It was a popular spot, though the prices were a bit above the average. As the car cruised through the city, Kaminari, seated in the back with his mom, glanced idly out the window, watching the scenery roll by. His attention was particularly drawn to the professional heroes patrolling the streets in their unique, sometimes flamboyant costumes. Seeing those so-called heroes, he found himself drifting into thoughts about the nature of hero society. With nothing else to occupy his mind at the moment, he indulged in some reflection. His opinion hadn't changed from over a decade ago. These professional heroes, who had essentially become state-employed civil servants, were more like specialized police officers. Funded by the government, they carried out duties like patrolling, arrests, disaster relief, and maintaining public order. If that didn't make them akin to policemen, what did? Some might argue that heroes are also ordinary people who need to make a living, so it's fair for them to be paid for their work. While this was a reasonable perspective, Kaminari felt there was a flaw in such reasoning. Becoming a hero should not be primarily about the money. If someone thought about how much they could earn from a rescue or whether the government would compensate them before taking action, then their motivations were questionable. If they were rescuing people solely for the reward, could they truly be considered heroes? In Kaminari's view, such individuals were perhaps better described as good people rather than genuine heroes. What is a hero, really? A hero is someone who acts selflessly, who risks their life for the well-being of others and the nation, enduring hardships without hesitation. A hero is someone who makes great sacrifices and contributions, even to the point of giving their life. The title of hero is the highest honor a society can bestow upon its members, and it should carry significant weight. It shouldn't be handed out lightly, not for minor deeds like rescuing a stray dog. At best, those people could be called kind-hearted individuals. If anyone could be labeled a hero simply for small acts of kindness, then what would that make those who sacrifice their lives for their country? Wouldn't it cheapen the sacrifices of true heroes? Thinking further, Kaminari pondered on the concept of compensation. A person with the ability to be a so-called professional hero, someone who could handle dangers far beyond what regular people could face, should not be dependent on the hero's salary to survive. Wasn't it possible for them to find other ways to make a living? Take examples from other worlds. Spider-Man was a journalist while working as a hero, and Superman held a job at a company. Characters like Wonder Woman, The Flash, and the Fantastic Four all balanced hero work with other occupations. While those were fictional cases, Kaminari knew that in this world, many heroes did the same. Plenty of professional heroes held one or more other roles in society. For instance, UA. High school's teachers were all professional heroes, yet they also served as educators. Midnight, the R-rated hero, wasn't just a teacher, she was also a celebrity, frequently appearing on TV due to her stunning looks. Then there was Present Mike, who taught at UA while also working as a popular radio DJ. Cementos ran a construction company, while MT Lady was a top model and a prominent figure in the entertainment industry, with multiple endorsement deals. Death Arms ran a martial arts training gym. There were countless examples of professional heroes who found ways to integrate into society beyond just hero work. In Kaminari's opinion, this demonstrated that anyone qualified to be a professional hero could find other means to support themselves. If a person couldn't even manage that, what made them think they were capable of handling the dangers associated with being a hero? Therefore, Kaminari genuinely believed that the current system of professionalizing heroes was unnecessary. If the government needed these roles to be formalized, wouldn't it make more sense to incorporate them into the police force? The term hero itself seemed almost superfluous under such circumstances. Interestingly, his middle school history teacher had once explained that when quirks first started appearing, law enforcement chiefs had insisted that police officers refrain from using quirks during duty. To Kaminari, this reasoning seemed baffling. How did using quirks contradict law and order? Aren't quirks, at their core, tools wielded by humans? Besides, he was pretty sure that militaries worldwide had their share of powerful quirk users. However, it wasn't as if he harbored any extreme opinions about it. He was just airing out some idle complaints. Kaminari did hold onto a personal principle, though. Even if he obtained a hero license, even if he found himself in situations where he could save others, he would never accept the so-called hero remuneration from the government. To put it simply, he wasn't going to profit from the hero title, nor did he feel he needed to. Helping others shouldn't automatically be equated with being a hero, just like he didn't consider every patrolling professional hero to be the real deal. To him, the term professional hero was just a unique job title, similar to being a ninja or a pirate. It was merely a profession, nothing more. That being the case, his goals were clear. He was an entertainer, a star who helped others as a hobby. The hero license was just a small step towards achieving something bigger. As for his ultimate ambition, how about becoming the world's top lightning-based quirk user? That didn't sound bad at all. Hat. As Kaminari imagined a bright future, the corners of his mouth curled up. His mother, sitting beside him, couldn't help but wonder what her son was so happy about. Just then, the car pulled to a stop. His father in the driver's seat unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, announcing, "All right, we're here." Chapter 8, The Bloody Iron Fist. "You know, it feels like forever since we last had barbecue here," Kaminari remarked, a hint of nostalgia in his voice as he followed his parents into the restaurant. When exactly had it been since their last family outing to this place? He still remembered the owner vividly, not because of the food, but because his appearance was so startling. The man was nearly a spitting image of Saitama from One Punch Man. Seeing someone who looked that much like a famous manga character had definitely left an impression on Kaminari. However, it seemed the owner wasn't around today. Kaminari glanced around and felt a small pang of disappointment. "Yeah, it must have been a few years," his dad agreed as he spoke to the hostess and then followed her to their table. "The last time we were here was when I resigned and we celebrated the successful founding of our family's company. Please, take a seat here," the waitress, who looked like a college student working part-time, said with a polite smile as she led them to an empty table. "Thank you," Kaminari's dad replied, sitting across from him, while Kaminari and his mom took seats on the opposite side. Being the one who knew the menu best, his dad took charge of ordering. The family had similar tastes when it came to barbecue. "We'll start with 2 servings of grade 3 Osaka beef tenderloin, 2 glasses of ice water, and a Coke," he said, opting for plain water since he had to drive. Kaminari, of course, got his usual Coke. "By the way, Dad, how's the company doing?" Kaminari asked casually as he leaned back, listening to the music playing softly in the restaurant. The DJ responsible for the playlist was none other than UA's teacher, Present Mike, Japan's top voice quirk user. "It's doing great," his dad replied enthusiastically. He never hesitated to discuss the company with Kaminari since its success was, in part, thanks to his son. "Pikachu merchandise is selling really well, and your Railgun song is steadily climbing in popularity on MTV. Actually," he continued, "the song has just reached number 7 on the top list. We're also seeing some decent revenue from the various copyrights. Overall, things are looking up." Kaminari nodded in satisfaction. Even without the support of the Pokémon franchise from his previous world, Pikachu's iconic design was still making waves in this one. It wasn't the cultural phenomenon it had been in his past life, but it was enough to sustain a small company and keep his family financially comfortable. "But," his dad hesitated, "I think our product lineup is a bit too limited. Pikachu's great, but it would be better if we had a few more characters like it." "No problem. I'll draw a few more when I get some free time," Kaminari said without hesitation. While he had no intention of becoming a full-time manga artist, he could definitely add a few more iconic characters like Squirtle or Charmander to expand the company's offerings. And then there's the matter of new songs. Kaminari didn't say this out loud but kept it in mind. He enjoyed singing far more than drawing, though he'd have to choose his next track carefully. "Let Go. A Dream Engraved in My Heart. You Can Also Ignore the Future." At that moment, the familiar intro to his song suddenly filled the restaurant, followed by his own voice coming through the speakers. Surprisingly, it was his mom who reacted first. "Hey, isn't this your song?" she asked, recognizing it instantly since she had just watched Kaminari perform at his solo concert earlier that day. Yeah, it is, both Kaminari and his dad replied in unison. His dad, especially, had heard the song so many times due to work that he was nearly sick of it. Yet, it also highlighted a peculiar situation. Kaminari's music was popular, but he himself wasn't. Despite his song playing, no one in the restaurant seemed to realize that the artist was sitting right there. Kaminari didn't mind, though. He was still a student, and there would be plenty of time to worry about fame when he was older. As long as he continued to release high-quality music, the recognition would come eventually. Just then, the food arrived. The young waitress deftly handled the meat with a pair of clean spatulas, grilling the beef on the iron plate. Her movements were smooth and efficient, cutting the meat along its natural grain. There was a certain artistry to the traditional Japanese style of cooking, and Kaminari couldn't help but appreciate the show. All done. Now, you can add any seasonings you prefer. It's best enjoyed right away, the waitress said with a polite bow before moving on to prepare the next batch of beef. Kaminari was used to the routine. He took the black pepper his mom handed him and sprinkled it lightly over the sizzling meat. Then, he picked up a piece with his chopsticks and savored the rich aroma before placing it in his mouth. As mentioned earlier, their family shared similar tastes, and black pepper was a favorite for barbecued meat. But just as the three of them were settling in to enjoy the meal, a news report suddenly interrupted the background music on the restaurant's TV. This is Na News. We are broadcasting an urgent update. Just an hour ago, police on patrol discovered the remains of professional hero Plastiki on Okeza Street. Based on preliminary investigations, authorities suspect the notorious hero killer. The Saitama City Police Department, in cooperation with professional heroes, has launched a full-scale search for the criminal. The police chief has also issued a warning advising professional heroes not to act alone for the time being and urging citizens to limit their outings until further notice. The chief, Yasuhei Yanai, assures the public that every effort is being made to bring the hero killer to justice and restore peace to Saitama City. The broadcast ended as abruptly as it began, and the usual program resumed. But now, no one in the restaurant was paying attention to the show. Instead, whispers filled the air as customers discussed the sudden appearance of a super criminal in their city. It wasn't surprising, the thought of a nationally wanted criminal who had murdered over a dozen professional heroes lurking nearby would unsettle anyone. The hero killer, hey, pretty straightforward name, Kaminari mused, taking a sip of his coke. Looks like no matter what world you're in, there will always be villains like this. Still, he had no intention of doing something reckless, like tracking down the killer to play hero. He'd just gotten a second chance at life and wasn't about to throw it away. He was only 15, after all. This was clearly a job for the professionals. But just as Kaminari was lost in thought, a passionate voice rang out from a nearby table. Dad! I'm going to become the best hero, and I'll catch all these bastards who harm people. If I meet this hero killer, he'll get a taste of my iron fist. Chapter 9, Colossus. The passionate declaration managed to draw the attention of those nearby, including the Kaminari family. At first, some people thought it was just a kid making empty boasts, but when they saw a young man standing there with a confident expression, the adults' faces softened into amused smiles. In a society like this, people were generally very forgiving towards the boldness of youth. If an adult had made the same proclamation, they might have been met with derision or even outright sarcasm. But when a teenager said it, it was taken as a sign of energy and spirit. After all, wasn't that the kind of atmosphere a healthy, modern society should cultivate? Of course, anyone with a bit of common sense could see that the boy's words were reckless, even dangerous. Ideally, someone would step in to caution him, but nobody did. Tetsu. The boy's father, a burly man with a flat-top haircut, suddenly stood up and delivered a sharp knock to his son's head. The young man yelped, clutching his head in pain as his father scolded him. Don't get carried away. I'm telling you right now, don't go around talking about things you don't understand. His father's voice was stern. Remember, if you ever find yourself face to face with the hero killer, you turn and run. Use your quirk to get away and don't look back until you're in a crowd. Yes, it was the role of a parent to teach these lessons. Guardians were responsible for grounding their children in reality, and any adult with a proper education understood this. But why? The boy protested, still rubbing his sore head. I've already been accepted into the hero course at UA High School. And with my quirk, no one's going to be able to hurt me. He was fuming inside, thinking that if it hadn't been his dad, he'd have used his quirk to defend himself. If I used my quirk, you wouldn't have been able to land a hit at all. His loud response quickly drew the interest of other customers and even some of the waitstaff. UA High School's hero course was known for training the top future professional heroes, and hearing that this boy had already made it in was impressive news. In Japan, many students applied to UA, but fewer than 40 actually passed the entrance exams for the hero course each year. With only two classes, Class A and Class B, comprising about 20 students each, it was a highly selective program. Of course, UA wasn't the only high school with a hero program, but it was the undisputed top choice. The reason was simple: nearly half of all professional heroes who had ever ranked in the top 10 were UA alumni. The school had earned its reputation step by step through sheer results. Sit down. The boy's father's voice was gruff, yet filled with a father's pride tempered by caution. As a retired soldier, he knew how overconfidence could lead to disaster. He'd seen enough to know that if his son didn't curb his arrogance, it could cause irreparable harm in the future. Don't start boasting just because you passed the written test. The practical exam is still ahead. Let's see you stand out there before you start talking big. The boy, whose quirk made him as blunt as his personality, just grinned. The written test was the hardest part for me, and I passed that already. The practical exam will be a piece of cake. I'm definitely going to get into Class A. He then added to himself, even if I end up in Class B, I won't let myself lose. By now, the surrounding patrons had gone back to their meals and conversations. Watching a father and son bicker, even if it was amusing at first, only held so much interest. Just then, Kaminari's father, who had been quietly observing, set his glass of water down, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and addressed the other table. "Excuse me, may I introduce myself?" "Hey." The boy's father turned towards Kaminari's dad, looking slightly confused. He listened as Kaminari's father continued. "It's just that I overheard your son mention the practical exam at UA. My son is also taking it, so I thought it might be good for them to get to know each other beforehand. You know, just in case they can look out for each other when the time comes." Kaminari's father was a businessman through and through, and he saw no harm in helping his son make connections. In his view, there was no downside to Kaminari befriending someone who could potentially be a future classmate. Of course, the boy might not pass the practical exam, but if he did, great. If he didn't, no harm done. What mattered was seizing every opportunity to create bonds. And if anyone questioned whether Kaminari himself would pass, his father didn't want to hear it. He was confident in his son's abilities, and that was that. Oh? What a coincidence! The boy's father seemed genuinely interested, glancing at Kaminari, who was also sizing up the boy. "You're taking the exam too?" When the boy realized there was a fellow aspiring hero in the room, his eyes lit up with excitement. "My name's TetsuTetsu. I'm from Ainahana Junior High," he announced with enthusiasm. "Kaminari Denki, from Tanibori Junior High," Kaminari responded naturally. He then asked, intrigued by TetsuTetsu's earlier confidence, "You seem pretty sure about your quirk. Mind if I ask what it is?" Living in a world full of extraordinary quirks, Kaminari had developed a fascination with learning about different powers. Unfortunately, most of the quirks he had encountered up to this point had been mundane or impractical things like changing the color of nose hairs or altering the shape of pupils. While mildly interesting, they fell short of the kind of superhuman abilities he'd been hoping to see, something like the powers from X-Men. So, when TetsuTetsu spoke with such conviction, Kaminari's curiosity was genuinely piqued. He was eager to learn what kind of quirk could give this boy such confidence. Of course, there was a bit of strategy in his question as well. The practical exam didn't involve teams, so everyone was essentially competing against each other. Any information Kaminari could gather about a potential rival could come in handy. Yet, it seemed neither TetsuTetsu nor his father had picked up on that subtext. In that sense, the father and son were very much alike, both straightforward and quick to trust. "He, my quirk's awesome," TetsuTetsu declared proudly, not noticing the subtle probing in Kaminari's question. "It's called steel. I can turn my entire body into metal, giving me super strength and toughness. It's like having the strongest shield and the strongest spear combined. Your body turns into steel." Kaminari's eyes widened as he finally encountered a quirk that seemed genuinely impressive. Instinctively, he blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "Colossus. Just like Colossus." Chapter 10, Thunder, Steel, and Saitama? Colossus. When Kaminari said this, both families were momentarily taken aback. But as they considered the nickname, they quickly realized how fitting it was for TetsuTetsu. Especially TetsuTetsu himself, who shot to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair, and shouted, "Cool!" His face lit up with excitement. That name is awesome, right? He was over the moon. Despite not having even passed the hero exam yet, and being far from a professional hero, those thoughts didn't cross his mind. He was confident that he was destined to succeed, and that was enough for now. Just as TetsuTetsu was about to speak again, a calm voice interrupted him. "Young man, this is a public place. If you're going to shout, take it outside." TetsuTetsu turned to see a bald man about his own height, wearing a simple set of work clothes. As TetsuTetsu's eyes fell on the nametag reading store manager, he quickly put two and two together. He immediately bowed his head in apology, first to the manager and then to the other customers who had been startled. Though he had a rough, straightforward personality, he wasn't lacking in manners, something drilled into him by his father, a retired soldier. Seeing that it was just a young boy getting a bit too excited, the patrons accepted his apologies without much fuss. Kaminari, sitting nearby, couldn't help but feel a bit strange. It was as if Saitama from One Punch Man were standing just a few meters away. The resemblance was uncanny, right down to the blank expression. It was surreal to see someone who looked so much like a famous character in real life. The bald store manager, satisfied with TetsuTetsu's apology, merely nodded and walked away, leaving TetsuTetsu to sheepishly return to his seat. "Hehe, I got a bit carried away. But seriously, I really like that name, Colossus. When I become a professional hero, can I use it?" TetsuTetsu asked, his eyes filled with hopeful anticipation. Kaminari didn't hesitate. "Of course. Go ahead and use it." After all, trading a cool name for the goodwill of a steel-skinned future hero seemed like a fair exchange. "Awesome!" TetsuTetsu beamed, clenching his fists like a kid who'd just been given the best present ever. "From now on, you're my partner, Kaminari. If anyone messes with you at UA, I'll protect you," he declared boldly. Kaminari's eyebrows twitched as he glanced at his parents, who were stifling their laughter behind their hands. Suppressing a grin himself, he gave TetsuTetsu a slight nod and said, "I'll count on you then. Leave it to me." TetsuTetsu thumped his chest in response, his loyalty unmistakable. But as the conversation continued, Kaminari's curiosity began to grow. He wondered whether his own lightning-based quirk would have any effect on TetsuTetsu's steel transformation. He also found himself questioning how he measured up against his peers in general. Up to this point, his training had been in solitude, practicing alone in Omiya Park. Although he had developed a few techniques that suited him, he'd never actually tested them against a real opponent. The only combat experience he had was using his quirk for a makeshift electrotherapy session on an old man as first aid, which was far from an actual fight. This lack of real-world experience weighed on his mind, especially with the practical exam approaching. It was like a martial artist who had only ever practiced in a dojo, suddenly thrust into a real fight. Mistakes were inevitable. He needed someone to spar with, someone tough enough to handle his abilities without getting seriously hurt. And from what he could see, TetsuTetsu might just be the perfect practice partner, or, in Kaminari's mind, the ideal punching bag sparring partner. As soon as the idea popped into his head, Kaminari's gaze shifted toward TetsuTetsu with newfound interest. Originally, he had planned to take it easy before the exam, but now he felt a sudden urge to gain some practical experience. Although experience was an abstract concept, its impact on combat effectiveness was very real. Kaminari knew this well from the countless shonen stories he had consumed over the years. "By the way, what kind of quirk do you have?" TetsuTetsu asked out of the blue, his curiosity getting the better of him. He didn't overthink things like Kaminari did, he was simply following the natural flow of their conversation. After all, he had shared his own quirk, so it was only fair that Kaminari did the same. It was the kind of straightforward honesty you'd expect from a 15-year-old who hadn't yet been hardened by the world. "I have a lightning-type quirk called electrification. It allows me to generate and release electricity from my body," Kaminari explained plainly. Since he had decided to befriend TetsuTetsu, there was no reason to be secretive. Sincerity was the foundation of any friendship. "Electrification? That sounds so cool," TetsuTetsu said, his enthusiasm as evident as ever. But his next words came with the bluntness typical of his personality. But I can't think of any famous lightning-type heroes off the top of my head. Dad, do you know any? The question made both fathers pause in thought. Kaminari's dad racked his brain but couldn't recall any notable lightning-based professional heroes in Japan. No, I can't say that I do, Kaminari's father admitted. He was careful with his words, preferring to say it himself rather than let TetsuTetsu's dad risk offending Kaminari. After all, Kaminari was still just a teenager, and young egos could be fragile. However, Kaminari himself wasn't so easily bothered. He took the response in stride, shrugging lightly. Well, that just means I'll be the first. I'll become the top lightning-type hero in the future. The confidence in his eyes was unmistakable, radiating as brightly as his quirk. Why should he downplay his ambition? There was no need for false modesty. Well said. That's the spirit, son. Kaminari's father cheered, his pride unmistakable. Kaminari's mother was also beaming, her heart swelling with admiration. To her, her son had always been amazing, but after seeing his solo performance, she had become his biggest fan. That's the attitude a young hero should have. TetsuTetsu's father agreed, impressed by Kaminari's unwavering self-belief. He and his son found the boy's confident demeanor refreshing, a stark contrast to the timid types they couldn't stand. At that moment, Kaminari pulled out his phone. Let's exchange contact info. That way, we can stay in touch. Sure. TetsuTetsu agreed enthusiastically. As soon as they had swapped numbers, Kaminari made an unexpected suggestion. By the way, how about meeting at Omiya Park tomorrow? TetsuTetsu blinked in surprise. Omiya Park? Why there? The cherry blossoms aren't even in bloom yet, right? Kaminari just grinned. Let's just say I have something in mind. Unfazed by the cryptic answer, TetsuTetsu slapped his hands together and declared, deal. I'll meet you at the park entrance tomorrow. Chapter 11, Witnesses. 8:55 a.m. Kaminari, you're too slow. At the entrance to Omiya Park, TetsuTetsu stood impatiently in a white t-shirt and jeans, his tone almost accusatory as Kaminari approached. Hey! Kaminari glanced at his watch, a Pikachu-themed one, naturally, and looked back at TetsuTetsu, bewildered. What do you mean? I'm not late. We agreed to meet at 9. Kaminari had slept in a bit that morning, enjoying a rare full night of rest after the excitement of last night's barbecue. He hadn't rushed, after all, it was only a short walk to the park. By his watch, he was perfectly on time. It was 8:55, a full 5 minutes early. But TetsuTetsu wasn't having it. Showing up exactly on time isn't good enough, he lectured, his voice unexpectedly serious. You should always aim to arrive at least 10 minutes early. Half an hour, if possible. You never know what might happen on the way. Kaminari was a little taken aback. For someone who seemed so rough around the edges, TetsuTetsu had a surprisingly strict sense of time. This unexpected seriousness added a new dimension to Kaminari's perception of him, deepening his appreciation for the boy's character. Maybe this guy was worth keeping around after all. A quirk user with a straightforward personality, a sense of discipline, and a strong set of principles could definitely be a trustworthy ally. Someone you could count on to watch your back. Well, that's just what my dad taught me. TetsuTetsu added, scratching his head sheepishly. Right. Kaminari gave him a flat look, then chuckled. You know, if you hadn't said that last part, you'd have sounded a lot cooler. Wait, really? TetsuTetsu touched his spiky hair instinctively, then laughed awkwardly. Just pretend I didn't say that then. Kaminari rolled his eyes and shook his head with a smile, stepping past TetsuTetsu and heading into the park. Come on, we've got stuff to do. Stuff? TetsuTetsu hurried to catch up. You still haven't told me why we're here. What are we doing? Trust me, I'm taking you somewhere interesting, Kaminari said with a knowing grin. TetsuTetsu seemed skeptical. You're not just bringing me here to give me a tour of the park, are you? He asked cautiously. I mean, I've lived in Saitama my whole life. I've been to Omiya Park like a dozen times. Kaminari shook his head, amused at how far off the mark TetsuTetsu was. No, it's not that. There's a place I want to show you. It's deeper in the park, a little secret spot. TetsuTetsu looked like he was about to say something else, but Kaminari cut him off. You'll see when we get there. They continued walking, heading further into the park. After about 10 minutes, they had reached an area where few people ventured. The trees thickened, and the sounds of the main paths faded away. The dense foliage of ancient cherry trees lined the narrow dirt trail, and underbrush blocked the view in every direction. Then Kaminari abruptly veered off the path, pushing his way through a thicket of bushes. TetsuTetsu hesitated, feeling an odd sense of unease. The thought crossed his mind that maybe this wasn't just about showing him a secret spot. Was this some kind of test? Or worse, some bizarre initiation? His steps faltered, and he whispered nervously. Kaminari. What? Kaminari glanced back without stopping, already near the end of the bushy path. It's just, TetsuTetsu stammered. Look, I'm a straight guy, okay? I, only like girls. What? Kaminari froze mid-step, processing what TetsuTetsu had just implied. He then looked around at the secluded surroundings and finally pieced together what his friend was getting at. You idiot! Kaminari shouted, turning back to face him, his face twisted in a mix of disbelief and irritation. What kind of nonsense are you even thinking? Oh, so that's not it. TetsuTetsu's confusion faded into relief. He realized he'd completely misunderstood the situation. Of course not. Geez, just follow me. Kaminari grumbled, stomping forward with renewed determination. We're almost there. But as Kaminari led the way deeper into the thicket, he mentally noted that he owed TetsuTetsu a little payback for this awkward moment. Sure, the guy was taller, but did he really think Kaminari would lose in a one-on-one? What a joke. Height wasn't everything. TetsuTetsu might be 1.74 meters, but Kaminari wasn't exactly short at 1.68. Besides, that kind of difference wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like Kaminari was jealous or anything. No way. Not a chance. Here we are, Kaminari announced, stepping out of the brush and into a clearing. TetsuTetsu emerged right behind him and immediately found himself at a loss for words. The space before them was roughly the size of a basketball court, enclosed on all sides by thick vegetation. On the far end, a small raised mound jutted out of the ground, scarred with countless blackened burn marks. It looked like it had been subjected to years of abuse, pockmarked with craters and darkened streaks. Nearby, a yellow umbrella stood anchored into the ground, its canopy adorned with dozens of tiny Pikachu patterns. Beneath it were a plastic table and a pair of matching chairs. A Pikachu alarm clock sat on the table, ticking away quietly. But the real eye-catchers were the ground itself and the cracked surface of the mound. The earth was riddled with deep fissures of various sizes, crisscrossing the area like an intricate web. The sight of it all made TetsuTetsu's jaw drop. Are you kidding me? What's with this place? He exclaimed, his eyes wide. It looks like some kind of battlefield. Not quite, Kaminari said, his voice steady. He walked toward the mound, his back to TetsuTetsu, and placed a hand on its rough surface. This isn't a battlefield. It's a training ground. My training ground. He turned around to face TetsuTetsu, his expression serious. I've been coming here for the past 9 years, practicing and refining my quirk. Every mark, every crack you see is a witness to the effort I've put in. Kaminari's gaze drifted toward the Pikachu alarm clock on the table, a small, silent companion that had been present for almost every one of those training sessions. For him, this little corner of the park was more than just a place to train, it was a testament to his determination and growth. So, he continued, his tone lighter as he extended a hand toward TetsuTetsu, how about it? Want to spar with me here? I'm guessing you've never had the chance to fight someone while using your quirk at full power, right? Chapter 12, Can't Keep Up. Fighting with quirks. TetsuTetsu's eyes widened in surprise. Kaminari had expected at least some hesitation, maybe even a refusal, but the boy's enthusiastic reaction caught him off guard, rendering any words of persuasion Kaminari had prepared useless. Are you serious? We're really gonna fight using our quirks? TetsuTetsu asked, his voice filled with excitement. He stared at Kaminari, half expecting him to backtrack or change his mind. After all, using quirks in a fight was technically illegal unless you were a licensed hero, and he'd been itching for a chance like this for a long time. For years, his own quirk had felt like a waste, unable to be used for anything meaningful. Was there anything more frustrating? Absolutely, Kaminari confirmed without hesitation. That's exactly why I brought you here. At this, TetsuTetsu's excitement reached new heights. He couldn't help but look at Kaminari with even more eagerness. But a flicker of doubt crossed his face, and he frowned slightly as a thought occurred to him. "But, what if I hurt you?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. His quirk, after all, wasn't just about being made of steel, it was about having the raw power and resilience of it too. He could break rocks with a single punch, and if he accidentally hit Kaminari too hard. "Hurt me?" Kaminari scoffed, already seeing where TetsuTetsu's thoughts were headed. But he needed TetsuTetsu to fight without holding back, so he swallowed his amusement and let his confidence shine through. "I think you're dreaming if you think that'll happen," he retorted, smirking. KZZT crack. Electricity crackled as Kaminari clenched his fists, arcs of golden lightning snaking across his skin. He stared TetsuTetsu down with a look of cool disdain, his body glowing with energy. "Your quirk may be tough, but mine." He paused, letting the electricity sizzle for effect. "Is on a whole different level." TetsuTetsu blinked, momentarily speechless. He hadn't expected this side of Kaminari. In the short time they'd known each other, Kaminari had seemed like a laid-back, easy-going guy. But now, there was a fire in his eyes that TetsuTetsu hadn't seen before. It didn't bother him, though. If anything, it fired him up even more. After all, what was the point of a fight if your opponent didn't have some fire of their own? "Ha ha ha! Then don't blame me for not holding back!" TetsuTetsu exclaimed, his voice booming with excitement. With a deep breath, he activated his quirk, his entire body turning as shiny black as steel encased him from head to toe. He clenched his fists, testing his hardened form, and the sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the clearing. Boom! With a powerful step, TetsuTetsu launched himself forward, the ground beneath his foot cracking from the force. He charged at Kaminari like a human battering ram, his steel-coated fists ready to smash through anything in his way. KZZT crack. Electricity arced across Kaminari's body as he braced himself, deciding to meet TetsuTetsu's charge head-on. He needed to gauge the difference in their strength, and there was no better way than a direct clash. Electric light fist. "Bring it on!" TetsuTetsu roared back. He saw Kaminari's fist crackling with electricity and felt his excitement swell. He was confident that his steel would be more than a match for a little lightning. Boom! The two fists collided, and the impact sent a shockwave rippling through the clearing. The golden electricity exploded outward from Kaminari's fist, and he felt it surge through TetsuTetsu's arm. But as the current coursed across TetsuTetsu's steel body, Kaminari's confident expression faltered. Wham! A moment later, TetsuTetsu's fist broke through the electric resistance and slammed into Kaminari's chest, knocking him back several steps. The impact left him breathless, and he could feel the dull ache spreading through his torso. It wasn't a light hit, but it wasn't enough to knock him down either. He dug his feet into the ground, steadying himself as quickly as he could. TetsuTetsu, meanwhile, held back from pressing his advantage, staying where he was and watching Kaminari curiously. The remnants of the electric current still clung to his body, crackling and popping. But aside from a mild tingling sensation in his fist, he didn't feel much else. "Ha, looks like your electricity doesn't affect me that much," TetsuTetsu taunted with a grin. Kaminari took a deep breath, rubbing his sore chest. He wasn't particularly surprised by the result. So, going head-to-head doesn't work. He thought back to the impact and what he had felt. It wasn't just that TetsuTetsu's quirk made him hard as steel, there was more to it than that. "It's not just the steel. He's got enhanced strength and endurance too," Kaminari muttered to himself. "Makes sense, though. A body like that would need some serious muscle to move around." It was a passive trait, much like his own immunity to electricity. And with the way his quirk worked, Kaminari suspected that as he grew stronger, he might even gain some resistance to heat and fire. After all, lightning did generate high temperatures. TetsuTetsu broke his train of thought. "Well? Are we done here, or do you want another round?" Kaminari didn't respond right away. Instead, his eyes narrowed, and a determined smile crept onto his face. "Oh, we're just getting started." "What?" Before TetsuTetsu could process the words, Kaminari's entire body lit up with electricity. This time, the golden arcs danced across his whole form, not just his fists. "You're just gonna crank up the voltage?" TetsuTetsu asked, raising his guard. He wasn't sure if Kaminari was stubbornly refusing to accept that his electricity didn't work, or if he had some other trick up his sleeve. But he wasn't about to let his guard down now. KZZT crack. In an instant, Kaminari surged forward, his entire body moving with a speed that seemed almost unnatural. TetsuTetsu's eyes widened as he watched Kaminari close the distance in a blur of golden light. He tried to react, raising his arm to intercept, but it felt like his limbs were moving through molasses. Krak. Kaminari's fist connected with TetsuTetsu's chest, sending a burst of electricity across the steel surface. TetsuTetsu gritted his teeth, but his real concern wasn't the hit, it was the realization that Kaminari was already slipping past him, ducking to his left and circling around. His brain registered every movement, and he could clearly see Kaminari's every step and shift in weight. Yet somehow, his own body felt slow and unresponsive, as if it were lagging behind his thoughts. What? TetsuTetsu's frustration grew as he spun around, only to find that Kaminari had already moved out of range again. His mind knew what to do, knew exactly how to counter every move Kaminari made, but his body simply couldn't keep up. Why? Why did it feel like his own limbs weren't responding the way they should? Why was he always a beat behind? Chapter 13, High-Speed Movement. Boom. Kaminari appeared behind TetsuTetsu once more, his fist crackling with electricity as it struck. Just before TetsuTetsu could turn around to defend himself, Kaminari had already dodged to the right and landed a punch on his dazed opponent's side. To be fair, the reason Kaminari could attack so recklessly without worrying about causing real harm was thanks to TetsuTetsu's quirk. His steel transformation made him the perfect sparring partner, a human punching bag that could take a beating without getting seriously injured. As for Kaminari's current technique, it wasn't anything particularly complex. It was essentially an extension of his previous electrotherapy move, except this time he was using the electricity to stimulate his muscles rather than someone else's heart. By directing a controlled amount of current to his muscle cells, he could temporarily enhance his speed, reflexes, and strength. The electric stimulation activated his muscles, allowing him to move with heightened agility. The increase in speed was the most noticeable, though his strength benefited as well. After all, speed without a solid foundation of strength wouldn't get him very far. The idea for this technique came from his memories of past inspirations. While it wasn't quite on the level of Enel's lightning powers from One Piece, it was something akin to Killua's Godspeed from Hunter x Hunter. Of course, Kaminari's current version was still a far cry from that kind of mastery. For now, it was more like a low-level version of Godspeed, though he preferred to think of it as the first stage of his own path toward perfecting that kind of high-speed movement. And so, he had given it a fitting name. High-speed movement. The name came to him almost by chance after he'd initially perfected the technique, as he had been fiddling with his Pikachu-themed alarm clock at the time. The move's description matched the ability agility from Pokémon, makes the user's body lighter, greatly increasing speed. It was simple and fitting, a reminder of his roots and inspirations. Boom. At this point, TetsuTetsu was starting to lose his footing. The repeated hits and constant electric shocks were taking their toll. His balance wavered, and with one last punch from Kaminari, he finally toppled to the ground, electric sparks still dancing across his metal skin. TetsuTetsu. Kaminari called out, letting the electricity dissipate from his body as he quickly ran over to help his friend up. He hadn't expected the steel boy to go down like this. After all, TetsuTetsu had taken plenty of punches earlier without showing any signs of weakening. Hey? Oh, I'm fine. TetsuTetsu said, shaking his head and standing up quickly as he brushed himself off. What were you thinking about? Kaminari asked, skeptical that his punch had actually been strong enough to knock down someone as durable as TetsuTetsu. Hehe, I just got distracted for a second. TetsuTetsu admitted, scratching his head in embarrassment. Then, with a puzzled look, he asked, what was that just now? How did you get so much faster? Kaminari was about to explain when TetsuTetsu interrupted himself. No, wait, you weren't that fast. I could still see your movements. I just couldn't keep up. Kaminari grinned, realizing that TetsuTetsu had hit the nail on the head. Exactly. It's about agility. Agility. TetsuTetsu repeated, frowning in confusion. Kaminari nodded. My movement speed did increase, but not to the point where you couldn't see me. Your eyes and mind could still follow what I was doing, but there's a difference between seeing something and being able to react to it. He continued, my attack speed, my ability to change direction, and my reflexes are all several steps ahead of your body's reaction time. So, that's it. TetsuTetsu murmured, deep in thought as he tried to figure out how to close the gap between his reactions and Kaminari's movements. Kaminari tapped his friend's steel-coated shoulder and added, "Plus, your body is heavy when you're transformed. Even though you're much stronger than the average person, your body mass and the density of your steel form slow you down in terms of quick movements. You might have raw power, but if you can't hit me, then what's the use? You can't just stand there and let me keep taking shots at you." TetsuTetsu didn't like that, and his expression showed it. "But you haven't actually done any damage to me," he argued. "And I'm immune to your electricity. It's like trying to swat a mosquito with a cannon," he continued, his frustration mounting. "Sure, you might be fast, but if you get caught even once, it'll be game over." "Gotcha," Kaminari thought with a small spark of satisfaction. His earlier taunts had worked, TetsuTetsu was riled up, and that's exactly what he had wanted. The Steel Boy's overconfidence had given Kaminari the opening he needed to try out a special move that might just be effective against him. Of course, if Kaminari really wanted to hurt TetsuTetsu, he could push his quirk to its limits and unleash a massive surge of electricity, a million-volt shock, perhaps. He doubted that TetsuTetsu was completely immune to such an extreme amount of electrical power. But that would have some unpleasant side effects. Even if TetsuTetsu didn't sustain serious injuries, the resulting brain overload would probably leave him in a dazed state, giggling and giving a thumbs up like a brainless idiot. And Kaminari didn't want to win like that. He rolled his eyes at TetsuTetsu's boast and asked, "Oh, you're not convinced?" "Of course not." TetsuTetsu huffed, his face a mix of determination and irritation. "If I just stand here, I bet you couldn't do anything to me. There's no way you can keep this up forever." "Funny, I could say the same thing about you," Kaminari replied dryly. "You can't keep that steel form going indefinitely, can you?" TetsuTetsu flinched. "How did you know that?" The look of shock on TetsuTetsu's face was almost comical. He had been certain that he hadn't mentioned any limits to his quirk. "It's not that hard to figure out," Kaminari said with a knowing smirk. "When you get to UA, you'll learn all about it." Kaminari's eyes gleamed with intent as he sparked up once more, electricity starting to crackle over his body. "You think I can't do anything to you? Let's see about that. What are you planning?" TetsuTetsu asked, narrowing his eyes as he braced himself. With a confident grin, Kaminari said, "I'm going to show you why I said you might still be living in a dream. Get ready, because you're about to learn just how powerful lightning can really be." He let the electricity flow through him, feeling the familiar surge of energy build up in his muscles. "Don't worry," he added with a mischievous glint in his eyes, "this won't hurt much." Chapter 14, Reggae. This time, TetsuTetsu had learned his lesson. He kept his focus on Kaminari, staying completely silent and fully alert, his body in a boxing stance. He wasn't going to be caught off guard again. Every muscle was tense, ready to react at a moment's notice. "I'll end this in one move," Kaminari declared as he charged forward, golden lightning crackling around him. His right palm was wrapped in a fierce, concentrated energy that was far more intense than any of his previous attacks. The air around him sizzled, carrying a faint hint of sulfur that dispersed almost instantly in the forest breeze. "Bring it on!" TetsuTetsu shouted, his eyes locked on Kaminari, who was closing the distance rapidly. Just when TetsuTetsu expected Kaminari to launch another straight attack with his electrified palm, Kaminari's feet made an unexpected twist, propelling him to TetsuTetsu's left side. "So, you're trying to get behind me again?" TetsuTetsu thought, recognizing the tactic from before. But this time, he didn't rely solely on his eyes to follow Kaminari's movements. Instead, he trusted his instincts and turned to defend even before seeing Kaminari's next move. Surprisingly, it worked. He managed to track Kaminari, his eyes meeting Kaminari's just as the latter tried to circle behind him. "He's keeping up," Kaminari thought, intrigued by the determination in TetsuTetsu's gaze. It was impressive how quickly he'd adapted, considering Kaminari had only briefly explained his speed advantage moments earlier. "Maybe this guy really does have a knack for fighting," Kaminari mused. It wasn't just his strength that made TetsuTetsu formidable, he had a kind of raw combat intuition that Kaminari found impressive. The electric stimulation coursing through Kaminari's body was heightening his senses, allowing him to think more quickly and control his high-speed movements with precision. "But let's see how long you can keep this up." Without hesitation, Kaminari shifted tactics. He abandoned his previous strategy and began moving in rapid circles around TetsuTetsu, maintaining a 1-meter distance. He darted left and right, accelerating his pace, trying to force TetsuTetsu to lose track. TetsuTetsu spun around desperately, doing his best to keep up. He knew that if he allowed Kaminari to get behind him again, it would be like the first round all over, Kaminari raining blows from every angle while he had no chance to fight back. His frustration was growing, especially since, as he had pointed out earlier, Kaminari's electric punches hadn't done any real damage. But being kept on the defensive like this was maddening. What TetsuTetsu didn't realize, though, was something Kaminari knew all too well. If you defend for too long, you'll eventually lose. The thought resonated in Kaminari's mind as he narrowed his eyes, electricity flaring up with newfound intensity. He saw a brief opening, a momentary misstep in TetsuTetsu's footing, and that was all he needed. Now! Claw strike! Kaminari's right palm, wrapped in a continuous current, struck like a blade. He dashed forward, exploiting TetsuTetsu's split-second vulnerability, and chopped downward at the back of his neck. KZZT crack! A burst of electricity, twice as powerful as his usual lightning fist, erupted upon impact, and Kaminari felt the current penetrate the hardened steel exterior. He had gambled correctly. TetsuTetsu's quirk didn't fully transform his internal anatomy. The steel transformation was limited to his skin, hair, and nails, leaving his muscles and nervous system relatively unprotected. The electric current surged into TetsuTetsu's nervous system, temporarily disrupting the signals between his brain and body. Kaminari landed lightly on his feet, halting his high-speed movements as he stood behind TetsuTetsu, who had gone completely rigid. He reached out and tapped the steel boy's back gently with a finger. "It's over. You've lost." TetsuTetsu's eyes went wide in panic. His body wasn't responding, his limbs were frozen, and his quirk had deactivated on its own. He couldn't move his arms or legs, even his mouth refused to cooperate, rendering him speechless. Only his eyes could move freely, darting around in bewilderment. What? What did he do to me? TetsuTetsu's mind raced. For the first time, a trace of fear crept into his thoughts. He was completely paralyzed. "Relax, you're not hurt," Kaminari assured him, stepping in front of TetsuTetsu and speaking calmly. "You'll be fine in about a minute." TetsuTetsu's panic subsided slightly at Kaminari's words, but he was still desperate for an explanation. "I used an enhanced version of my electric palm strike," Kaminari began. "The current penetrated your iron skin and disrupted the electrical signals in your nervous system. Basically, I temporarily cut off the communication between your brain and most of your body." He added, "That's why you're having trouble moving. Your body's response signals are all messed up. In a severe case, you could even find yourself doing the exact opposite of what you intended." TetsuTetsu's mind spun as he tried to process Kaminari's explanation. The terminology was familiar, he'd heard some of it in school, but the practical application was far beyond anything he'd expected to encounter in a sparring match. Kaminari saw the blank look in TetsuTetsu's eyes and sighed. "In simpler terms, I've temporarily disabled your control over your body. Since quirks are also regulated by the brain, you're unable to use your steel transformation right now." He added, "You might still be able to move a bit if you try hard enough, but it'll be unpredictable. The current disrupted the normal pathways in your nervous system, so your commands could end up controlling the wrong parts of your body." As if to test Kaminari's words, TetsuTetsu tried to lift his right arm, only to find his left leg twitching instead, almost causing him to fall over. "Whoa, careful!" Kaminari caught him just in time, helping him regain his balance. "I wasn't finished explaining yet. Your body can react, but because the signals are scrambled, it won't always do what you intend." Kaminari thought for a moment, then decided to put it in terms TetsuTetsu might better understand. "You know when you play online games, and there's a skill that silences your character or adds a fear effect. Think of it like that. Except instead of your character, it's your body that's being affected. Your quirk is the one being silenced." However, Kaminari didn't mention that for this technique to work, he had to strike a specific spot on the back of the neck. His control over the electrical currents wasn't refined enough yet to apply the same effect elsewhere on the body. As TetsuTetsu's muscles slowly regained their normal function, he let out a shaky breath and collapsed to the ground in a sitting position, his mind still reeling from the experience. The sensation of being completely helpless had been terrifying. "You okay?" Kaminari asked, sitting down next to him. He felt a pang of guilt for pushing the match as far as he did. Sorry about that. I shouldn't have used that move on you. But you've got to understand your quirk's defense is so strong, I didn't have many options. The apology seemed to hit the right note. TetsuTetsu, who had been staring at the ground, finally looked up, a grin spreading across his face. Don't worry about it, I'm fine. That was actually kind of awesome, he said, waving off the apology. What do you call that move, anyway? Kaminari paused. He hadn't actually thought of a name for it yet. He didn't want to use something obvious like Thunder Chop, and he was hoping to develop a whole set of techniques in the future. As he recalled the sensation of controlling TetsuTetsu's movements and the eerie stillness that had taken over his body, an idea came to him. Fear your own body. Silence your own quirk. It's like there's a ghost inside you, Kaminari muttered to himself. He then looked at TetsuTetsu with a serious expression. From now on, I'm calling it Reggae. Chapter 15, Mysterious Theory. Reggae, Kaminari said with a grin. TetsuTetsu, still sitting cross-legged on the ground, nodded hesitantly. Yeah, that name fits. It felt like I was possessed or something, like a ghost was controlling me. Kaminari's expression shifted, and he asked, how do you feel? TetsuTetsu blinked, not immediately understanding what Kaminari was getting at. Hey? What do you mean? The feeling of fighting. Kaminari clarified, his eyes lighting up with excitement. He raised his hands, small arcs of electricity crackling between his fingers. Didn't you feel it? The thrill of using your quirk to its fullest, of clashing with someone else at full power, wasn't it exhilarating? TetsuTetsu thought back to their sparring session. There was definitely something different about the experience, something he hadn't felt in the 15 years he'd lived. The clash between his steel body and Kaminari's lightning had felt like a dance of opposing forces, each trying to overwhelm the other. It was as if every punch, every shock, had resonated through his entire being. He couldn't deny it. Fighting like that had felt like gulping down ice-cold soda on a scorching summer day, every nerve tingling with a strange kind of joy. And then there was that one moment. TetsuTetsu recalled the rush of satisfaction he'd felt when he'd managed to catch Kaminari's movements out of the corner of his eye, relying on pure instinct to turn and face his opponent in time. It had felt like he'd conquered something, overcome a hurdle through sheer determination and wits. The feeling was almost as rewarding as the day he'd passed the UA written exam. However, his expression shifted slightly as he looked at Kaminari and said, but you're the one who was doing most of the beating. If anyone was having a good time, it was you, right? Kaminari almost choked on his own laughter. The way this guy words things. He couldn't help but cough and quickly steer the conversation back on track. All right, let's not get hung up on who had the better time, he said, trying to keep a straight face. Let's talk about your quirk. TetsuTetsu blinked, momentarily thrown off track. My quirk? What about it? Have you ever trained your quirk before? Kaminari asked, tilting his head slightly. Trained? No, TetsuTetsu replied, his brows furrowing in confusion. I thought quirks were just, well, you know, natural. You're born with them, right? That's true, Kaminari nodded, but that doesn't mean they can't be improved. Think of it like working out. You can build your muscles and get stronger through exercise, and the same logic applies to quirks. Wait a second. That means... TetsuTetsu's eyes widened as realization dawned. He looked around the clearing and remembered what Kaminari had told him before. So this is where you've been training your quirk? All those things you just did, your speed, that reggae move, were they all developed here? That's right, Kaminari confirmed. I started training my quirk here 9 years ago after reading some professional reports online about quirk development. I figured if I could make my body stronger through regular exercise, then I could definitely strengthen my quirk too. 9 years, all on your own. TetsuTetsu muttered, his voice trailing off. For some reason, his frustration over losing to Kaminari started to fade, replaced by a newfound respect for the boy standing in front of him. TetsuTetsu glanced at the cracked ground and the scorch marks scattered across the clearing. There was no doubt Kaminari had put in years of hard work. Every mark was a testament to countless hours of training. TetsuTetsu clenched his fists. So, does that mean I can make my quirk stronger through training too? Theoretically, yes, Kaminari replied, but I'm not a professional quirk instructor, so I can't say for sure what kind of training would work best for your quirk. TetsuTetsu's excitement dipped slightly, but then he remembered that they would be attending UA soon. Well, U.A.'s full of pro heroes, right? I'm sure I can find someone there who can help me train my quirk, he said, his confidence returning. Exactly. I have my own questions I want to ask the instructors there too, Kaminari said as he stood up and stretched. His legs had gone a bit stiff from sitting for so long. But one thing is for sure, training your body will definitely help improve your quirk, especially since your type of quirk probably relies more on physical strength. In that case, I'll ask my dad to find me a gym tomorrow. TetsuTetsu exclaimed, clenching his fists. And don't forget to come here and spar with me often, Kaminari added, adopting a mock-serious expression. Combat experience is just as important as physical training. We've got the practical exam coming up, and if you're not used to fighting, you might end up freezing up when it matters most. He continued, I'm willing to bet a lot of the other students taking the exam have never used their quirks at full strength before. They probably haven't even had any real combat experience. That gives us a big advantage. Kaminari's words seemed to hit home, and TetsuTetsu nodded eagerly. He hadn't thought about it before, but it made sense. Most people never got the chance to push their quirks to the limit, and having an edge in experience could be the key to passing the practical exam. Also, even though your quirk gives you great strength and defense, it has some obvious weaknesses, Kaminari said as he walked over to the plastic table, grabbing a chair. Like what? TetsuTetsu asked, following him. For starters, your speed and agility, Kaminari said bluntly. If you're up against someone faster or someone with long-range attacks, you'll have a hard time. If they keep their distance and wear you down, you won't be able to catch up, let alone land a hit. He continued, it's a big problem if you can't close the gap. If your opponent can choose when to engage and when to retreat, you'll always be on the losing side. TetsuTetsu frowned. But that's just how my quirk works, right? It's not like I can change that. There are ways to compensate, Kaminari said, shaking his head. I remember reading that UA also has a support course. They train students to become support heroes, and part of their job is to develop gear and gadgets for pro heroes. He glanced at TetsuTetsu. So, the easiest way to cover your weaknesses would be to get some support gear, maybe a net launcher to trap opponents at a distance or some kind of booster boots to help increase your movement speed. Hearing this, TetsuTetsu's face lit up. That's awesome. I didn't know there were things like that, he said excitedly. But don't get too reliant on support gear, Kaminari added, his tone serious. If you depend too much on gadgets, you might get caught off guard when you are forced to fight without them. For people like us who have strong quirks, it's better to have a technique or strategy that we've trained ourselves. I see. That makes sense, TetsuTetsu nodded. He was starting to see the bigger picture. Actually, I think there's a training method that could work for you, Kaminari said, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. It's unconventional, and it's not something I've ever tried myself, but given your physical condition, it might be just the thing you need. TetsuTetsu was intrigued. Really? What is it? Well, Kaminari began slowly, I've seen this technique in an old anime I used to watch. It involves using the body's natural strength and speed in a very specific way. If you can master it, you could achieve bursts of speed that would let you close the distance between you and your opponent in an instant. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's difficult, though. If I had to rate it, I'd say it's an S-class technique in terms of training difficulty. But, given your physique, there's actually a chance it could work. TetsuTetsu's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Tell me more. What's the technique? Kaminari took a breath. All right, listen carefully. Chapter 16, The Choice of the Second OP. This method is a bit complicated, so I'll explain it on the way. Kaminari said, giving TetsuTetsu a pat on the arm as he walked past him and headed back toward the bushes. Don't ask why he didn't pat him on the shoulder, he just didn't feel like it. What? We're leaving already? TetsuTetsu looked disappointed. They had only been at the training ground for about half an hour. But considering the mysterious training method Kaminari had hinted at, he couldn't help but follow along, even if it meant leaving so soon. Today was just to show you the place, Kaminari explained as he led TetsuTetsu out of the wooded area and back onto the cherry blossom-lined path. Once we get into UA, we're going to need somewhere private to practice with our quirks. This spot will be perfect for that. As they walked, Kaminari continued, besides, don't you think our training ground is missing something? TetsuTetsu thought about the clearing they'd just left. He couldn't pinpoint anything specific that seemed out of place. What do you mean? Kaminari smirked. A chair. Didn't you notice there was only one chair out there? Oh, right. TetsuTetsu exclaimed, realization dawning on him as he lightly slapped his right fist against his left palm in a eureka moment. Kaminari sighed, giving him a helpless look. Why do you think I was sitting cross-legged on the ground with you earlier? I didn't exactly have a choice. Hehe, my bad, TetsuTetsu said, rubbing the back of his neck in embarrassment. But it also made him appreciate Kaminari a little more. At least Kaminari wasn't the type to think only of himself, he was someone who paid attention to the little things that made others comfortable. So, we're just going to buy a chair now? TetsuTetsu asked, looking slightly deflated. When are you going to tell me about that training method? Relax. Didn't I say I'd explain it on the way? Kaminari replied as he walked ahead. But... He paused for effect, even if this technique works for you, it's not something you'll master overnight. Kaminari, stop teasing me and just tell me already. TetsuTetsu exclaimed, his impatience showing. Alright, Kaminari conceded. The technique is designed to train explosive speed. The basic idea is to use the force of repeated impacts to generate extreme acceleration. TetsuTetsu's expression turned serious as he listened intently. And how exactly do I train for that? It's going to sound too simple to be effective, Kaminari began, but the method is essentially about practicing your stance. You'll have to master a specific rhythm of repeated impacts. Stance training? That's it. TetsuTetsu's face fell. He'd been expecting something more extraordinary. You've got to be kidding me. After all that build-up, you're just telling me to stand still. Kaminari smirked, clearly amused by TetsuTetsu's reaction. You think it's that easy? To make this technique work, you'll need to hit the ground 10 times within 0.36 seconds. Only then will you generate enough reactive force to propel yourself with the kind of speed we're talking about. TetsuTetsu's jaw nearly dropped. 10 times, in 0.36 seconds? Is that even humanly possible? Not for just anyone, Kaminari said, his tone growing serious. It requires a body that can withstand the stress of such rapid movements. Most people would end up breaking their legs even if they managed to achieve that speed. He continued, but with your quirk, it's not impossible. Your steel form gives you the durability needed to push beyond normal human limits. TetsuTetsu finally understood why Kaminari had said earlier that this technique was something only he could possibly master. His quirk, steel, provided the kind of physical resilience that would be essential for such intense training. The biggest hurdle for most people was already something he could overcome thanks to his quirk. But even knowing that didn't make the challenge any less daunting. 10 times in such a short amount of time, can I really do that? TetsuTetsu thought, doubt creeping in. So, what do you say? Still want to give it a shot? Kaminari asked, as they exited Omiya Park and made their way toward the subway station, intending to head to Saitama City. Of course. TetsuTetsu said, his voice filled with renewed determination. Even if it's difficult, at least now I have a goal, a direction to follow. I'm going to give it everything I've got. His mind raced with possibilities. If he could master this technique, what else could he do with his newfound speed? Could he adapt it to deliver a flurry of rapid punches or increase the power of a single strike by focusing the momentum? Kaminari gave him a reassuring pat on the back as they boarded the subway train. Good. Just don't forget that this will take time. You won't master it by the day of the practical exam. In the meantime, you should work on your fundamentals, learn some basic combat techniques. After all, your quirk makes you a close-range fighter. You'll need to know how to handle yourself up close. He continued, and when you get into UA, look into ways to improve the hardness of your quirk. Right now, your steel form isn't at its maximum potential. I was still able to break through with my electricity, so there's room for improvement. TetsuTetsu nodded along. Kaminari's advice made sense, and he felt lucky to have a friend who seemed to know so much about quirks and fighting. As far as he was concerned, Kaminari was practically his quirk coach at this point. After buying a folding chair at the store, TetsuTetsu decided to head home. He planned to bring the chair with him the next time they visited the training ground. As they parted ways, the two agreed to meet up again on the day of the UA entrance exam. Phew, time to take care of my own plans now, Kaminari said to himself as he watched TetsuTetsu head off with the new chair in hand. The thought of the upcoming exam loomed over him, but there was something else he needed to focus on first: his music. With 5 days left before the practical test, Kaminari had an idea for a new project. He wanted to release another song before starting school. Once he got into UA, his schedule would be packed, and he wasn't sure he'd have the time or energy to dedicate to music the way he did now. The question is, which song should I choose for my second release? He muttered, running through a mental list of potential tracks. His first song had been well received, so this one needed to be just as impactful, if not more so. There were so many choices. It was a good problem to have, but it was still a problem nonetheless. Too many options, he sighed, scratching his head in frustration. But I guess, that's a nice problem to have. He knew one thing for certain: whatever he picked, it had to resonate. It had to be something that would stay with his listeners and motivate him, just like only My Railgun had. As he wandered through the streets, he found himself humming various melodies, searching for that spark, that feeling that would tell him, this is the one. It was time to decide. Chapter 17, The Old Man and the Song. In Kyoto, Japan, nestled in a tranquil courtyard that exuded a sense of zen, elegance, and quietude, a white-haired old man in a pristine white kimono sat under the eaves, his gaze resting on a playful Shiba Inu frolicking near a meticulously arranged rock garden. His faint smile radiated a warmth that was both gentle and harmonious, reflecting a life of calm contemplation. But despite the serene atmosphere, Mitsui Aragoshi, who stood outside in a perfectly tailored black suit, felt a sense of nervousness. In his hand was a folder containing information that felt almost lifeless, its contents cold and factual. "You found the boy, then," the old man said in a calm, assured voice, as if it were already a foregone conclusion. "Yes, grandfather," Mitsui replied, stepping forward to hand over the file. "Here is his information." The old man took the folder, his eyes settling on a photograph attached to the first page, a photo of a young boy who matched the one he had been seeking. His eyes softened, but rather than reading further, he closed the folder and gestured for Mitsui to recount the details. "His name is Kaminari Denki, 15 years old. He recently graduated from Tanibori No. 1 Junior High School in Saitama. His academic record is impressive. He's held the top rank in his grade from elementary school all the way through junior high, without ever slipping to second place," Mitsui recited. The old man, however, was not easily impressed. As a member of the Mitsui family, he had seen his fair share of prodigies and high achievers. A top ranking in public schools wasn't anything extraordinary for someone with his background. But when Mitsui added, "and he's maintained perfect scores in all subjects for 6 consecutive years, a hint of surprise flickered in the old man's eyes. "Oh!" the old man murmured, his tone light. "So, my little benefactor is quite the genius. That's impressive." Once his grandfather finished speaking, Mitsui continued, "He's also passed the written exam for UA High School's hero course and will be taking the practical exam next week. So, he wants to be a hero," the old man mused, his eyes momentarily distant as he considered this. The thought that the boy who had saved his life aspired to be a hero seemed fitting. Yes, that suits him. A boy like that should indeed be a hero. "Grandfather," Mitsui ventured carefully, UA's practical exam has a notoriously high failure rate. Should we reach out to the school on his behalf, maybe through one of our business connections?" The old man turned his head slightly, a bemused expression on his face. "Do you really think UA would take a request from us seriously? Or that the Mitsui family holds sway over an institution like UA? While the Mitsui family was indeed powerful, with influence that extended across Japan and even internationally, their power lay within the realms of business, not the elite circles of the hero world. They could indeed leverage some lower-ranking heroes or influence a few hero agencies through business ties, but the idea of interfering with UA's internal affairs was absurd. Mitsui, however, wasn't convinced. "But we've supplied UA with hero costumes and specialized equipment for years now," he insisted. "Surely, they'd give us some consideration." The old man's eyes glinted with a touch of amusement at his grandson's naivete. "You've misunderstood the nature of that relationship," he replied. "It isn't that UA needs us. We provide those resources because it grants us access to future heroes. And besides, several other companies are providing the same services. If you think UA sees us as anything more than just another supplier, you're mistaken." But rather than chastising Mitsui further, the old man simply shook his head and declined the suggestion gently. No, I'm confident this boy can pass the exam on his own. He has the ability. For some reason, the memory of his first encounter with Kaminari played in the old man's mind. There had been something about the boy, an aura that exuded both strength and humility, that made him certain Kaminari would succeed. As you wish, grandfather, Mitsui said, bowing his head in acquiescence. Though he still didn't entirely grasp why his grandfather placed so much faith in U's autonomy, he let the matter drop. Shall I arrange to contact the boy, then? Mitsui asked. The old man paused, considering the question. He certainly wished to meet Kaminari again and express his gratitude properly, but it didn't feel right to simply thank him with a few words. After all, the boy had saved his life, and that kind of debt demanded more than a token gesture. His gaze fell on the folder Mitsui had brought, and a thought crossed his mind. Mitsui had mentioned hero costumes and equipment earlier. Yes, that could work. No, let's not contact him directly, the old man said, a small smile curling at the corners of his lips. I want to give this child a surprise, a big one. A surprise? Mitsui echoed, raising an eyebrow. His grandfather's tone hinted at something more than just a simple gift, but he did not press the matter. By the way, is there anything else about him? What about his family? The old man asked. If he couldn't repay Kaminari directly, he could at least make life easier for those close to him. That would be the least he could do. Mitsui flipped through his mental notes on Kaminari's file. His father started a small toy company a few years ago, he began. And Kaminari himself is something of a musician. He's an independent artist who uploads his songs on MTV's music platform. One of his tracks is getting pretty popular, but he's not that well known yet. A musician, too. The old man chuckled, intrigued by the boy's multifaceted talents. Kaminari was only 15, yet he had already achieved more than many adults. With perfect grades, entry into the hero program, and a budding music career, it was clear that Kaminari was a truly exceptional young man. Which company owns that music platform? The old man asked, curious about whether there might be an easy connection he could leverage. It's part of Viacom Media Group, based in the U.S., Mitsui replied. Do we have any dealings with them? Not directly, no, Mitsui admitted. It doesn't matter, the old man said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Speak to your father and have him reach out to someone at Viacom. See if they can give this boy some special attention on the music platform. It shouldn't be a difficult favor to ask. At the level the Mitsui family operated, arranging a meeting with Viacom's executives wouldn't be a challenge. Even if they hadn't done business before, there was always room for mutually beneficial arrangements, especially with such a simple request. As for his father's company, the old man continued, find a way to give it a little extra support. Nothing too overt, but make sure they get some favorable deals. Mitsui nodded, committing the instructions to memory. Understood. Is there anything else, grandfather? That will be all, the old man said, rising from his seat. You may go. He moved gracefully to the edge of the porch, glancing out toward the Shiba Inu still playing in the yard. Yes, grandfather. Mitsui bowed again and began to walk away. But before he reached the courtyard exit, his grandfather's voice stopped him. One more thing, the old man said, his tone contemplative. Have someone arrange for me to listen to this boy's music. I'd like to hear his song. Check out the other fanfictions I'm working on. Asterisk Ultimate Man JJKX Soul, loading golden entries at the start. Asterisk One Piece, King of the World starting with the nitrogen fruit. Asterisk Naruto, reborn as Orochimaru. Asterisk starting with Real Madrid. Chapter 19, Chapter 18, Hero. Office of the President, Kaminari Toyco, Limited, Saitama City. Yes, I'll make sure he prepares some new material as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Kaminari's father, dressed in a formal suit, slowly hung up the phone, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. The call had come from Japan's MTV Music Network, informing him that they intended to heavily promote his son next year. However, one song alone, Only My Railgun, wouldn't suffice for a full-scale push. They needed more material, preferably a new song. It was good news, great news, even. Some up-and-coming singers would be over the moon at the opportunity. But for Kaminari's father, there were doubts lingering in the back of his mind. The core issue was that new song request. How could he be sure his son could come up with another track as strong as the first? Inspiration didn't always strike twice, especially not on demand. Creativity wasn't an exact science, after all. I'd better ask him first. Now, he was filled with concern, not only about whether Kaminari could deliver another high-quality song, but also whether the request would put too much pressure on him. After all, the UA high school entrance exam was next week, and he didn't want anything distracting Kaminari from what he believed was more important, getting into UA and pursuing a career as a professional hero. If it doesn't work out, we'll just let this music opportunity go. Getting into UA comes first, he decided. Having made up his mind, he took out his phone and quickly dialed his son's number, listening anxiously to the rings. Dad. Kaminari's voice came through, sounding slightly confused. Well, I just wanted to ask, have you been working on any new songs lately? Kaminari, who had just reached the ground floor of the office building, stopped in his tracks. He glanced up toward the floor where his father's company was located. How did you know I was planning to release a new song? His father's unexpected question had caught him off guard. He hadn't told anyone about his plans yet. Hey! His father was taken aback for a moment before quickly responding, you actually have a new song? Since when? I've been working on something for a while, Kaminari explained. With UA starting soon, I wasn't sure I'd have time for music, so I figured I'd release my second single beforehand. He paused, still puzzled. But seriously, how did you know about the new song? His father let out a small laugh and explained the call from MTV, mentioning how they wanted more content if they were going to focus on promoting him. Kaminari's initial surprise quickly gave way to understanding. He wasn't too shocked by MTV's interest. After all, Only My Railgun was a solid song, and its sales had been quite promising. However, what Kaminari didn't realize was that the sudden attention wasn't just about the quality of his song. Without the context of a popular anime or established fame, Only My Railgun would have been just another good track in a sea of music. Moreover, other artists on the platform had similar or even better sales numbers. Under normal circumstances, a second promotional push wouldn't happen until a second hit was in the bag. But thanks to a certain intervention, Kaminari was about to get a rare opportunity. Dad, I'm downstairs. I'm coming up now to start recording, Kaminari said as he joined a stream of office workers entering the 20-story building. You're here already? His father's voice lifted with a mix of surprise and relief. Great. I'll get everything set up right away. After hanging up, his father stepped out of his office, a rush of excitement coursing through him. He was eager to hear what Kaminari's new song would sound like. After all, the previous track had climbed to 7th place on the sales charts without any substantial promotion. Nearly all of its success was thanks to the song's quality, and the rest could be attributed to Kaminari's intriguing persona. There was no denying that the boy's striking looks had caught the attention of more than a few listeners. Not bad for a 15-year-old, Kaminari's father thought with a grin as he hurried down the hall. Kaminari followed his father to a small but well-equipped recording studio located within the company's building. It was an unusual setup for a toy company that specialized in Pikachu merchandise, but his father had spared no expense in setting up a decent studio just for him. The studio even had a professional sound engineer, Dahu, on standby. While Dahu wasn't particularly famous in the industry, he had more than enough skill to handle the studio's needs. His main job was to maintain the equipment and ensure everything ran smoothly whenever Kaminari needed to record. Dahu, Kaminari's ready to record a new song, his father announced as they entered the room. Dahu was slouched on a couch, absorbed in a game on his phone. He jumped up as soon as he saw the president. Yes, sir. Dahu stammered, quickly stashing his phone away and looking a bit embarrassed. But before he could say anything else, Kaminari's father waved his hand dismissively. Never mind that. Just get the equipment ready, and there'll be no deductions from your paycheck. Here, this has the sheet music and lyrics, Kaminari said, handing Dahu a USB drive. Dahu, adjusting his glasses, took the drive with both hands and went over to the mixing desk to begin setting up. As an otaku and an avid anime fan, he had loved Only My Railgun. There was only one thing he had felt was lacking: he thought the song would have been even better if it had been sung by a girl. The thought of a female voice giving life to those lyrics had made him wish the track had a different vocalist. He glanced at Kaminari, who was standing in the sound booth with his blonde hair, highlighted by a black streak shaped like a lightning bolt. If only the young master were a girl. Dao mused, half-jokingly. He'd definitely make a cute idol. Little did he know, if Kaminari had any inkling of those thoughts, Dao might very well have found himself on the receiving end of a highly unpleasant jolt. Meanwhile, Kaminari had already taken his place in the recording booth, positioning himself in front of the mic. He took a moment to adjust his breathing and get into the right headspace. It took him a full 2 minutes before he felt ready, raising his hand in an okay gesture toward Dao. This song is going to be my gift, Kaminari thought to himself. To mark the start of something new. It's for me, for the future students and teachers of UA, and for everyone who dreams of becoming a hero. As Kaminari's fingers tightened on the mic stand, the rhythmic strum of an electric guitar filled the studio, followed by the powerful beat of drums. This wasn't just any song, this was an anthem for those who dared to dream big, to rise above the ordinary. And just like that, Kaminari's second single began to come to life. Chapter 20, Chapter 19, Pokemon. After spending 2 hours recording the initial version of the new song, Kaminari left the rest of the post-production work to Dao, who seemed unusually enthusiastic. Kaminari then headed to a professional photography studio in Tokyo, accompanied by his father's secretary. Japan's MTV had requested some high-quality photos to accompany the new single's release. Currently, Kaminari's profile on the website only had a single picture, his main profile image. Although Saitama City had a few photography studios, they weren't particularly renowned, so his father, the president of Kaminari Toyco, decided to send Kaminari to a well-known studio in Tokyo. The commute wasn't a big deal, since Tokyo was just a short drive from Saitama, and they could easily make it back the same day. If not, they could always stay overnight. But as it turned out, Kaminari managed to finish the photo session and return home by 7 that evening, courtesy of the company car and the secretary who dropped him off. While the photography session at the famous studio didn't take too long, he only took 7 photos in total. The quality was undeniable. The professional photographer and top-of-the-line equipment made all the difference. Of course, Kaminari couldn't help but think that his own good looks played a significant part. Among the photos, there were 2 that particularly stood out to Kaminari. They fit perfectly with the theme of his new song, Hero. One photo featured Kaminari sitting alone at a desk in a dimly lit room, a white band with the word victory written across his forehead. The only source of light was a small Pikachu lamp beside him, casting a warm glow on his focused, youthful face. The setting, combined with Kaminari's determined expression, perfectly encapsulated the song's message about perseverance and striving toward one's goals. The other photo was taken outdoors, with Kaminari doing push-ups under the blazing sun. His shirt was off, revealing a toned physique covered in sweat, while his face displayed a look of intense concentration, teeth gritted and muscles straining. The determination in his eyes spoke of an unyielding resolve to keep pushing forward no matter the obstacles. These photos resonated with the song's lyrics. A man should be strong for others. Bite the bullet. Be determined to persevere to the end. It doesn't matter if you fall. Just stand up again. That's all. If you can do it, you're a hero. Kaminari chose Hero as his second single because it wasn't just a song about himself. It was a song for all aspiring heroes, a tribute to the Hero Course students at UA High School, and a message to everyone out there, whether they were chasing dreams or simply trying to get through the day. The song's central idea was that anyone could be a hero, not just the professional ones we see on TV, but ordinary people who muster the courage to face life's challenges. In this superhuman society where professional heroes were part of everyday life, there were many songs with hero themes. But Kaminari noticed that most of them praised the deeds of established heroes or romanticized the hero profession. Few, if any, embraced the message that everyone can be a hero. He was determined to fill that gap. When he arrived home, the aroma of freshly cooked dinner hit him before he even reached the kitchen. His mother was waiting with a warm meal, but Kaminari first sent her and his father the photos from the studio via his phone, then headed straight for the shower. At dinner, his mother couldn't hide her excitement over the photos, even suggesting they get some printed to hang on the walls. "Where are you going to put them?" Kaminari asked, pointing toward the framed painting hanging above the TV in the living room. It was a depiction of Kaminari with his arms crossed confidently, a cheerful Pikachu standing beside him. "That's not a photo, it's a painting," his mother corrected him with a smile. "And don't worry about space. We could hang them in your room, or maybe even the bathroom." "The bathroom?" Kaminari and his father both froze at the suggestion. As they laughed, Kaminari's gaze lingered on the painting, and an idea sparked in his mind. He remembered how, when he was younger, his mother had sketched the first real Pikachu for him after he had drawn a crude version himself. In a sense, she was the first person to bring Pikachu to life in this world. "Mom," Kaminari said suddenly, "how about drawing more Pokemon? Or even taking over the creation of new Pokemon entirely?" "Me?" His mother blinked in surprise. "You really think I could do that?" Kaminari nodded eagerly. "Of course. You're great at drawing, and you taught me everything I know. Besides, I could use some help expanding the Pokemon lineup." His mother hesitated, glancing toward Kaminari's father, who was seated across the table. "Well, if you think I could do it." Kaminari's father looked thoughtful, stroking his chin. He wasn't opposed to the idea. His wife had studied art and had always been passionate about painting. Plus, it would give her something meaningful to do while still being close to the family. He nodded. "Sure, why not? Kaminari can share the ideas with you, and you can be in charge of the illustrations." "Awesome!" Kaminari cheered. He was thrilled not just for the help, but for his mother's sake as well. "This way, even when I'm busy at UA, we can still collaborate on creating new Pokemon." And speaking of expanding, his father interjected, "I've been discussing with the company about turning the Pokemon concept into a manga series. It could eventually evolve into an anime, games, or even movies. What do you think?" Kaminari's eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing. But I won't have the time to draw comics myself. You could hire a manga artist to adapt the settings I come up with." He knew that the storyline of the manga would likely diverge from the one in his previous life, and the protagonist might not even be Ash Ketchum. But in his view, the real charm of Pokemon wasn't tied to any one character or plot, it was all about the Pokemon themselves. As long as the world was filled with captivating creatures, the series would thrive. Of course, Kaminari added, the protagonist has to start with a Pikachu. That's non-negotiable. Actually. Kaminari's eyes gleamed with a sudden inspiration. Why not make me the protagonist of the manga? It could follow me and Pikachu as we travel the world, encountering different Pokemon. His parents exchanged a look. The idea had merit, and imagining their son's likeness as a manga character embarking on adventures was undeniably appealing. They could even picture him someday appearing on TV as part of the Pokemon world. "I think it's a great idea," his father said with a grin. "Let's do it."
Thanks for listening.